The other four true demon guards indifferently cupped their hands together towards Qin Yu and left. In this world, seeing once was better than hearing 100 times. Was this the holy sun that everyone in the demonic path recognized? For a moment, they all felt a little regretful for accepting this mission. Qin, you could feel the indifference and alienation in their attitudes. He rubbed his nose and bitterly smiled. However, he quickly suppressed his emotions and calmly waited for the next development of the matter. He just didn't know what was so special about this girl from the Chu kingdom that he didn't know. Qin Yu wasn't worried about true demon guard armor appearing. Although the people living in this military camp were all second-class guests that didn't have the qualifications to enter in capital, they were still divided into various ranks. Demonic path cultivators were undoubtedly the most outstanding existences. As long as one had a brain, they wouldn't fall out with the demonic path because of something like this. However, there were some twists and turns in the matter. Qin Yu had somewhat underestimated the pride of the Great Chu Imperial clan. Even though they were just an inconspicuous side branch of the Great Chu Imperial clan, they were in a military camp in the capital region of the Great Chu. This gave them the confidence to toss and turn. So what if they were from the demonic path? Did they think they would be afraid? True Demon Guard armor didn't explain the details, but the final result was that this relative of the Great Chu Imperial clan lowered his head. It was just that it was a bit unpleasant. Because of this, Qin, you could clearly feel the increasingly dissatisfied attitudes of the true demon guards around him. Because she was worried that they would retaliate, Yu Ya and her unconscious cousin temporarily stayed in Qin Yu's courtyard. However, this could also be considered an explanation to the outside world. Many people suddenly realized that Yu Ya had climbed up a high branch. No wonder she could make a demonic path cultivator act. The deputy envoy sent someone to ask them several questions and warned them not to meddle in their affairs. But he didn't continue to pursue the matter. Things should have passed like this, but he never imagined that on that very night, the guest that was related to the Great Chu Imperial clan would suddenly die in his courtyard. When news of this spread out, the atmosphere in the military camp suddenly became thought-provoking. If a Blue Sea Realm master didn't have an old disease or illness, how could he suddenly die? The demonic path that had just come into conflict with this guest was naturally the greatest suspect. But as long as one had a brain, they would know that even if the demonic path was dissatisfied, they still wouldn't immediately kill someone after the conflict. This was a very simple reason. But no matter what, if this person died, the demonic path would have to bear some trouble. True Demon Guard armor had a dignified expression. Someone is deliberately targeting us. His eyes revealed worry. When they came to the Great Chu, they had already promised the Lord Demon Envoy that they wouldn't allow anything to happen to the Saint Son. If there really was an accident, they feared that they would have no other choice but to atone for their sins with death. We have always been careful, so how could we have been targeted? Before True Demon Guard armor finished speaking, his complexion darkened. Yesterday, guard armor had appeared to protect that pair of sisters, and then someone had immediately died. Although he wasn't sure whether or not it was because of this, there was no doubt that it was the source of the storm. Wei, he hatefully said, the Saint's son is too soft-hearted. Could it be that he doesn't know that his life and death is a great responsibility for the demonic path? What a disappointment. Guard armor frowned. Shut up. Just what sort of status does His Highness have? How can you and I speak nonsense about him? If this really arouses suspicion, then even if yesterday's events didn't happen, they would still think of other methods. Be vigilant for the next few days. If there is an accident, activate the backup plan. The Demon Envoy certainly wouldn't. He only arranged a single path. If things went smoothly, then everything would be fine, but if something happened, then they would have to protect Qin Yu's life first. Of course, once this backup plan was activated, there was no guarantee that Qin Yu would survive. But there would inevitably be a massive number of spies that the demonic path had planted in the Chu Empire that would lose their lives. The discussion ended in silence. The 6 true demon guards all had heavy hearts. They didn't know how many people had died, but they didn't care, because once something happened, they would all die. The vice envoy personally came to the courtyard and gathered Qin Yu's group of 7. His eyes were cold and sharp. Was this matter done by you? What he worried about the most was that these youths with extraordinary backgrounds wouldn't know the immensity of the heavens and earth. If they killed someone, then things would truly become troublesome. Although the one who died was an unremarkable relative of the great Chu royal family. In the end, the bloodline of the great Chu royal family flowed through his body. Moreover, at this critical juncture, this matter could be big or small. Wei, he cupped his hands together. Lord Vice Envoy, rest assured that this matter has nothing to do with us. The Vice Envoy ignored him. His eyes fell on Qinyu. He could naturally see who was the true leader of this group. Qinyu was silent for a moment. He said, "It truly has nothing to do with us." The Vice Envoy let out a long breath. "It better be as you say." He hesitated for a moment and said, "I don't know why, but this matter has been reported to the Great Chu Palace. Originally, it was only a minor matter, but the 30-million-year celebration is just around the corner, and the person who died was related to the Great Chu royal family. Now, it has stirred up a considerable storm. If there isn't anything important, don't go out for the next few days." He didn't stay any longer. He turned and left. As long as it wasn't the demonic path that did it, then no matter how tough the Great Chu royal family was, they couldn't do anything to them. His last few words of warning were only a favor. Yuya hid behind the door and clearly heard the conversation in the courtyard. Her face was filled with guilt. She hesitated again and again before pushing open the door. She walked forwards and bowed. "This is all my cousins and my fault. We have implicated everyone here." She didn't know what to say. The people in front of her were all demonic path cultivators. Their status, and strength were all far above hers. Even if she wanted to repay them, there was nothing she could do. Qin Yu shook his head. "Although the Vice Envoy is solemn, this matter wasn't done by us, so it cannot be blamed on us. Miss, there is no need to worry too much." Wei Jia and the others drew back. First, with Qin Yu's status, they didn't know what he was talking about with this woman, so it was naturally inappropriate for them to stay and listen. Second, when they heard that this matter had reached in capital and that someone was adding fuel to the fire from behind, they became even more worried and didn't have the mood to continue staying. Yu was moved to tears. "This is all thanks to my lord. If it weren't for you, my cousin's life would have been ruined. Us sisters have nothing to repay you with. We can only thank my lord in our hearts and pray for you for the rest of our lives." Qin Yu smiled. "Miss, you speak too seriously." His tone was indifferent. He didn't ask for anything in return for helping her. He only wanted to understand just what sort of connection there was between this woman and that sudden tide rush of blood. Unfortunately, he still had no clue. As Qin Yu was considering whether or not he should say a few probing words, Yuya's face flushed red in this brief moment of silence. They weren't family or friends, yet he had helped them without hesitation just because he had served them for several days. Yuya wasn't a child. She naturally knew that this reason wasn't sufficient. Could it be? Could it be? She carefully looked up and glanced at Qin Yu. Although she couldn't see his appearance, she could see that he was tall and straight and had a calm demeanor. For him to be the leader of this group, it was clear that his background wasn't ordinary. If it was really as she thought, then what should she do? As she was panicking, the door behind her opened once more. Her cousin's pale face appeared. She had already woken up last night and had seen Qin Yu once. As her eyes fell on Yuya, her cousin could naturally guess what she was thinking. She couldn't help but bitterly smile. Although she didn't know the true identity of this armored Qin Yu, she knew that he didn't have the least bit of feelings for Yuya. Afraid that Yuya would say something she shouldn't and cause herself to be embarrassed, her cousin coughed and squeezed out a smile. "Cousin, the Lord rescues us without asking for anything in return. But you and I can't do nothing. I heard that in your early years you obtained a strange seed and have always regarded it as a treasure. How about you take it out to express your sincerity?" Yuya revealed an uncomfortable expression. She didn't speak for a moment. Qin Yu thought that she didn't want to part with it. He said, "How could I accept something that Miss Yuya loves so much? Two misses, there is no need to be so polite. Just rest and recover in peace." He cupped his hands together and turned to leave. Yuya loudly said, "No, I I am willing to give it to the Lord." Her face flushed red. She hurriedly reached around her neck and took off an exquisitely woven necklace. The pendant was wrapped around the seed. Although Yuya's movements were fast, Yu could still clearly see that the necklace was hidden beneath her clothes. The pendant had clearly fallen on her chest. No wonder she had hesitated. Yu's expression stiffened. Luckily, he had the mask so no one could see him. He was about to wave his hand in refusal when his eyes fell on the pendant and his heart began to race. Intuition told Yu that the reason he had two sudden inspirations was because of this pendant. Like this, he couldn't bring himself to refuse. He looked at the necklace that was passed to him, and Yuya, whose head was nearly touching her chest. Yu hesitated for a moment and said, "It looks quite exquisite. I will take it and give it to the women in my family, so they can learn how to weave it." The reason he said this was so that the atmosphere wouldn't be too awkward. Otherwise, if a man like him were to take something from a girl's chest and carry it around with him, how would she feel? The necklace was still warm in his hand. He could even smell the light fragrance of a girl's body. How could Yu stay here any longer? He cupped his hands together and left. Yuya looked at his back. As she thought about the women Yu mentioned just now, her heart was thrown into chaos and her shyness was reduced by half. Her cousin sighed. She held onto her sister's hand and said in a soft voice, "Big sister is several years older than you, so my eyesight might be better. Although I don't know the identity of this lord, I can imagine that he must be extremely noble. Little sister, you should give up on such thoughts lest you feel even more sad in the future." Yuya revealed a flustered expression, like a little animal whose secret had been discovered. Looking at her cousin's pitiful expression, she bit her lips and nodded. After returning to his room, Yu placed the necklace in front of him. After sensing it for a long time, he lifted his hand and opened the package around the pendant, revealing a gray object inside. It was cold to the touch and gray without any patterns. If he hadn't heard them say that this was a seed, Yu feared he would have treated it as a common-looking stone. After thinking for a moment, he sent out his divine sense and wrapped it around the seed. But no matter how he probed it, he couldn't sense any life from it. Was it really a seed? Yu frowned. After a moment of hesitation, he flicked his sleeves and took out the 9th province furnace, using its strength to cut off the void. In the next moment, Yu closed his eyes and his mind flew far into the distance. Soon, the space in the room trembled and a part of it collapsed inwards. The projection of a great sun appeared in the dark nothingness. But today, this great sun projection was even dimmer and its volume had shrunk by several times. Yu opened his eyes, an apologetic look on his face. "I know that I shouldn't have summoned you here, but there is something I need your help with. I have no choice but to take this risk." He didn't want to delay. He spread out his hand and revealed the seed. "Help me determine just what this is." An invisible strength swept up the seed, and it fell into the great sun projection. It took much longer than Yu imagined before the seed was sent back. The great sun projection became much dimmer, as if it had consumed a great deal of its strength. A thought fluctuation came from the little blue lamp. This is indeed a seed. It needs to be in a place where extreme yin and extreme yang meet in order to hatch. Before it finished speaking, the collapsing void collapsed, and the sun projection faded away. Yu's heart skipped a beat. He turned his hand and put away the seed as well as the 9th province furnace. Just as he finished doing this, his body froze. Panic and fear surged out from the depths of his soul. It was like a divine God was looking down on the earth from the highest heavens. Luckily, this feeling came quickly and left just as quickly, disappearing without a trace. Yu didn't dare to be careless. After waiting for a long time and seeing nothing strange, he frowned and his thoughts raced. If there was someone that could sense the existence of the little blue lamp, then that person must be an existence that stood at the peak of the world. In the Great Chu's capital region, less than 2,000 miles away from Ming City, there was only one person, the Great Chu Emperor, Mi Ganyuan. He had reigned for 170,000 years and held great authority within and outside the Great Chu Empire. His pressure was unrivaled. Would he be discovered? Yu's heart chilled. After carefully thinking for a long time and determining that he hadn't revealed any flaws just now, he calmed down a little. Although the aura just now was terrifying, it was extremely ethereal. If it weren't for the cosmic sea cross bell, Qin, you didn't think he would have been able to sense it. If the Great Shu Emperor had only swept out with his divine sense, he might not have noticed him. Chapter 568. In Capital, Imperial Palace. The Great Shu Emperor summoned all the assistant ministers to discuss the details of the grand celebration that would take place in 2 days. This involved the face of the empire, so no one dared to make any mistakes. They each made their own suggestions, striving for perfection. Suddenly, sitting on the throne, Mi Ganyuan closed his eyes. The third assistant minister's complexion changed, and he fell silent. Everyone else in the hall also revealed looks of surprise. The 4 assistant ministers were all senior figures of the court and had a deep understanding of the emperor. If it weren't for some extraordinary matter, then the emperor, who had always been generous to his subjects, would never be so disrespectful. What was going on? The 4 assistant ministers' thoughts raced. They looked over their bodies and didn't find anything wrong. Only then did they quietly relax. The emperor had reigned for 170,000 years. He had no authority over his subjects, nor did he have any worries from the outside world. Although he was usually tolerant of his subjects, deep in his bones, he had a tyrannical personality. He was proud and callous. The 4 assistant ministers had been in court for the shortest period of time and had over 40,000 years of experience. It was unknown how many grand figures they had seen die at the hands of the emperor. So how could they dare to be careless? The hall was silent. In just several breaths of time, the eunuchs in the corners of the hall were covered in a cold sweat. But they could only grit their teeth, not daring to make a single sound. Luckily, it wasn't too long before Mi Ganyuan opened his eyes. His eyes were like an ancient well without ripples. Although they seemed ordinary, if one looked carefully, they would discover that they were unfathomably deep, like vortexes, as if they could contain the entire world. The corners of his lips curved up. This Great Shu Emperor, one of the most honored people in the world, revealed an inscrutable smile, as if he had discovered something interesting. The assistant minister had been with the Great Shu Emperor for over 100,000 years and was the most respected minister in the court. He thought for a moment and then respectfully said, "Your Majesty, what happened?" The second assistant minister, third assistant minister, and fourth assistant minister all had a bit of envy in their eyes. Only the assistant minister could ask such a question. They didn't have the face to do so. Mi Ganyuan swept his eyes around the hall. He paused for a moment and said, "I had a sudden feeling just now, and my divine sense descended upon the capital region. I discovered 2 interesting little fellows." He sighed. "I really can't imagine why the immortal and demonic paths would allow them to take such risks." His eyes were deep and serene, like the endless starry sky that could drown a person's mind. Since the emperor mentioned it, that meant there was something to be said. As the cabinet minister heard the words immortal and demonic path and then saw the deep emotions in his majesty's eyes, he had some guesses in his heart. "Your Majesty, could it be that the immortal and demonic path envoys have hidden their identities?" Mi Ganyuan lightly said, "If my guess isn't wrong, then one of the demonic path envoys should be the newly ascended holy Sun Yaobin. As for the immortal sect envoys, that should be the new master of 9 Heaven Mirror Moon Palace, Shun Yuanin." Although the 4 assistant ministers were mentally prepared, they still couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice. They couldn't care less about their manners as they suddenly raised their heads. Their eyes were filled with shock and a bit of coldness. The Great Shu stood proudly in the world. It was the leader of the 7 empires. If it weren't for the immortal and demonic paths holding it back, it would have long since unified the world. Therefore, although they appeared to be peaceful on the surface, among the ministers of Great Shu, not a single one of them did not view the immortals and devils as a great threat. Now, a newly ascended Holy Sun and a trusted palace master were in Capital's capital region. They couldn't help but think about it. If these 2 people died, it would be an incomparably heavy blow to the immortal Tao and demonic Tao. Your Majesty, this is an opportunity bestowed by the heavens. As long as everything is arranged properly, there will be no hidden dangers left behind. The third minister said, his voice thick with killing intent. The fourth minister wanted to agree, but as he glanced at the silent second minister, his eyes flashed, and he tightly shut his mouth. Mi Ganyuan didn't respond. He said, Yuan Qing, what do you think? Yuan Qing was the courtesy name of the first minister. Even so, his tone was still respectful, without the slightest bit of complacency. Your Majesty, I believe this is inappropriate. The third minister frowned. Mi Ganyuan said, Tell me the reason. The first minister thought for a moment and slowly said, Reporting to your Majesty, although I don't know why the demonic path's holy son and immortal sex palace master have come to my great Chu, since they have come, the immortal and demonic paths must have made other arrangements. Unless they openly mobilize a massive number of masters, the chances of them being killed are extremely low. Although my great Chu is strong, the immortal sect and demonic path cannot be underestimated. If this matter is not handled properly, it will cause a great uproar. The third minister sighed inwardly. He knew that the first minister was right. It was no wonder that the second minister was acting like a turtle without saying a word. He wanted to challenge the second minister's position, but he didn't dare to be presumptuous in front of the first minister. He immediately said, Your Majesty, what the first minister says is correct. It was I who didn't think things through. But if those two came to my great Chu, they must have some unknown goal. Can my great Chu just tolerate this? The first minister smiled, not speaking. The second minister coughed and bowed. Your Majesty, the sea of purgatory will soon open. This might be an opportunity. The third minister coveted the position of second minister. Unfortunately, the second minister had an honest temperament, so the first minister was very satisfied with him. Mi Ganyuan could see all of the intrigue between the officials, but he didn't place it in his heart. Only when his officials were at odds with each other would he be able to sit firmly in power. Dong Qing is right. He looked up. This simple movement revealed the bearing of a king, as if he could look down upon the world. I and my great Chu dare to face any enemy. So what if it is the immortal sect or demonic path? The reason I didn't kill them was because I didn't want to use underhanded methods. Since the two of them came without notice, if I don't teach them a lesson, they will become increasingly arrogant and think that my great Chu has no one worthy. Yuan Qing, pass on my decree. The sea of purgatory's seal has been completely opened. Whether they obtain a great stroke of good fortune or are buried within, that will depend on their own fate. The first minister respectfully said, Your Majesty, if the sea of purgatory seal is completely opened, the degree of danger will rise by over 10 times. What will my juniors do? He frowned, revealing a bit of helplessness. His Majesty controlled the world, so naturally he could do as he pleased. But, although he was the first minister, he didn't dare to form grudges with anyone. He could only ask His Majesty to decide on this matter. Mi Ganyuan coldly coughed. The world has endless tribulations. Who doesn't fall into them? If they don't experience tribulations, how can they have any achievements? To be able to gain experience with the most outstanding juniors of the immortal sect and demonic path is their good fortune. His icy cold eyes swept through the hall. Do not reveal a single word about the seal. In addition, pass on my decree that all cultivators that enter the sea of purgatory will obtain the qualifications to meet the emperor. The four ministers felt their hearts tighten, but they didn't dare to reveal anything on their faces. They all fell to their knees, praising His Majesty for his wisdom. After discussing for some time, the matter was temporarily finalized. The four ministers bowed and drew back. After leaving the imperial palace, the third minister was the most restless. He said with a sound transmission, Lord First Minister, what should we do? Do you think we will send our juniors to their deaths, even though we know that there are dangers everywhere? The first minister said without expression, His Majesty has already passed down his decree. I advise my 3 colleagues not to do anything. If we delay His Majesty's matters, a great calamity will befall us. As he spoke, he strode away. The second minister apologized and quickly followed, leaving behind the third and fourth ministers. The third minister clenched his teeth. I don't believe that they will risk the lives of their juniors. The fourth minister hesitated for a moment. There is no need to be angry. The Lord First Minister is right. It is best if you don't touch His Majesty's decree. However, since His Majesty has informed us of this matter, that means he has a gracious heart. You can remove some of the juniors that have already been arranged, or you can replace them with others. The third minister's eyes brightened. The messenger is right. Time is of the essence, so I bid my farewells. The fourth minister looked at the receding figure and revealed a bit of contempt. Such a stupid person could actually become an assistant minister. All he did was take advantage of a good background. If it weren't for him attracting spies, the fourth minister wouldn't have cared about his life or death. But how was he supposed to do it? The fourth minister thought for several breaths of time. Then his eyes brightened and he smiled. Wasn't the Lord First Minister the best example? He would just do as he was told. The third minister sat in his carriage. As the curtain fell, all of the anxiety and anger on his face disappeared. His eyes were calm and indifferent, without the least bit of waves. Demonic path, Saint Son. Immortal sect palace master. He whispered, revealing a happy expression. I never thought that there would be such an unexpected harvest this time. A light smell of blood filled the air. Shen Yuanyin furrowed her eyebrows. A dignified look appeared in her indifferent eyes. That aura, just now, although it was fleeting, her heart was like a frozen lake. She had still sensed it. After thinking for a long time, Shen Yuanyin let out a light breath. Whether or not she had been discovered, she had already lost her path of retreat. In this world, the only great terror was death. This was also the only emotion she had after reaching large success of the sublime lost emotion code. Shen Yuanyin didn't want to die. She also believed that she wouldn't die like this. The Chu Empire held a grand banquet to entertain guests from all over. Depending on their status, the banquet was different. The main hall had 13 seats. Those that were entertained were the peak influences of the land of divinity and demons. The immortal path, demonic path, and the 6 great empires were all included. The banquet was naturally the best. There was a cup of immortal god wine that was rumored to originate from ancient ruins. The wine contained a boundless world strength that could directly increase a cultivator's cultivation. Wuma Sijan originally had the qualifications to enjoy a cup of immortal god wine. He was filled with anticipation, but he never imagined that before the banquet began, he would be ordered to leave in capital to deal with the death of the great Chu imperial family's in-laws. Wuma Sijan knew much more about Elder Chun, who didn't reveal his emotions. Although he was unwilling, he still smiled and agreed. After he left the imperial palace, his face was so gloomy that it seemed as if it would drip water. The one he hated the most was naturally Elder Chun. But unless he wanted to seek death, he could only suppress his anger in his heart. Thus, his anger doubled and fell onto the several true demon guards that had provoked him. The evil flames of Wuma Sijan's anger burned. After leaving Ing capital, he headed straight for the capital region army camp. He vowed in his heart that he would make these bastards pay a painful price. After several years of seclusion, a holy sun had suddenly appeared, stealing away all of his glory. Wuma Sijan was already depressed. This diplomatic mission to the Great Chu involved another lucky chance for him. But before it even began, he had already suffered a loss. That cup of immortal god wine was his turning point to break through a small boundary. If everything went smoothly, his chances of success would increase by 20%. There was no need to say anything more. If it weren't for this, with Wuma Sijan's shrewdness, he wouldn't have been so angry. When they arrived at the army camp, the deputy envoy had been notified ahead of time and was already waiting outside. As he saw Wuma Sijan's pale complexion, his heart trembled. Although he was the deputy envoy and his status in the diplomatic mission was only inferior to Elder Chun in name, he was well aware that there were some people he absolutely could not provoke. Wuma Sijan was absolutely one of them. Chapter 569. The vice envoy had been humiliated in front of everyone. He stiffened and nodded, but he wasn't happy at all. Instead, he sneered with a bit more anticipation. The several people in the courtyard clearly had extraordinary backgrounds. If they were to argue with Wuma Sijan, things would become lively. A group of people arrived in front of the courtyard. Just as the vice envoy was about to send someone to knock on the door, Wuma Sijan sneered and kicked the courtyard door open. In the courtyard, Wei Jia slowly stood up. He swept his eyes over the crowd, his icy cold eyes deep and serene. Wei Yi and the others walked out. Wuma Sijan was expressionless. Lord Vice Envoy, have all the people living in this courtyard arrived? The Vice Envoy shook his head. There are two more. Wuma Sijan sneered. I am here on the orders of Elder Chan to investigate this matter. Call everyone out. In the shadows, Wei Ding appeared. He was the smallest and thinnest of the six people. His light gray eyes didn't have the least bit of brilliance in them. There was still one person missing. Wuma Sijan was enraged. How insolent! He swept his eyes over Wei Jia and the others, thinking in his heart. Since these people were part of the diplomatic mission, they definitely knew who he was. If they could remain so calm, it was clear they had something to rely on. But the more this was the case, the angrier Wuma Sijan became. In terms of background, cultivation, and methods, he stood at the top of the younger generation of the demonic path. Besides His Highness the Saint's son, who could compare with him in the entire demonic path? Since you haven't come out, then you must be the one in charge. I am here on orders to investigate this matter. I want to see who dares to stop me. Wuma Sijan waved his hand. Two cultivators behind him stepped forwards. Wei Jia lifted his hand. Those who haven't come out are not feeling well and cannot be disturbed. If my lord wishes to ask anything, please look for us. How could Wuma Sijan be willing to listen? As his two subordinates saw Wei Jia blocking the way, they sneered and thrust out their hands. They followed beside Wuma Sijan in preparation to assist him once they entered the sea of purgatory. These two people were quite strong. Although it seemed like a simple clap, the truth was that their strength was completely restrained. The moment they touched each other, they erupted with astonishing, killing power. Bang, bang. In a spark, two loud explosions sounded out at the same time. The ground beneath Wei Jia's feet instantly shattered, and everything below his ankles sank into the ground. The two cultivators who attacked were sent flying. Their bones cracked, and their arms were twisted like fried dough twists. They landed heavily on the ground. They were in so much pain that their faces were pale, and their foreheads were covered in sweat. However, the two of them knew Wuma Sijan's temperament. Even if they were in great pain, they still endured it and did not let out a single groan. But now, when they looked at Wei Jia, their eyes were filled with awe. When their attack landed on Wei Jia's body, all of the power had been reflected back at them. This skill could be said to be astonishing. Wuma Sijan's expression changed slightly, and he immediately flew into a rage. He took a step forward, and his tyrannical cultivation erupted. In an instant, it was like a boulder falling into a still lake, stirring up raging waves. Wei Jia's face was expressionless as he similarly took a step forward. The expected earth-shattering collision did not occur. It was as if a torrential rain had descended from the sky to extinguish a mountain fire. In the blink of an eye, all the auras were wiped out. This move was even more shocking. It was even more unbelievable than the strength he displayed when he was on par with Wuma Sijan. The vice envoy's heart suddenly shrank. He hoped to see Wei Jia and the others humiliate Wuma Sijan and not fight him to the death. Otherwise, if something unexpected happened, he would not be able to escape the blame no matter what. Stop. This is the Great Chu's military camp. Could it be that you want to have a private battle and have others laugh at the internal strife of my demonic path? Wuma Sijan was surprised, but he didn't reveal any of this on his face. He coldly glared at Wei Jia and coldly coughed. I will remember today's matters. He flicked his sleeves and left. He originally wanted to vent his anger, but he had to suppress it. Wuma Sijan's current mood was truly poor to the extreme. But reason told him that this was the end of the matter. He wasn't able to see through Wei Jia's depths, and Wei Ding, and the others weren't easy to provoke. Moreover, there was still one more person who hadn't appeared from start to finish. It seemed that in these several short years of seclusion, the demonic path had become indistinguishable from before. Not to mention the dazzling His Highness Saint Sun, but the Zhao family Zhao Qianyuan had also taken off. And now, there was actually another mysterious character. As Wuma Xizhan thought of this, his complexion became increasingly pale. The vice envoy bitterly smiled. He looked at Wei Jia and the others in the courtyard, his lips moving, but in the end he didn't say anything. He turned and led his people away. Originally, this was only a guess, but now he could confirm that the backgrounds of these people in the courtyard were far more astonishing than he had imagined. This ruckus might attract the attention of others, and from the actions of Wei Jia and the others, it was clear they didn't want to be noticed. If he followed them here today, he might end up being blamed. This was truly an injustice. Wei Ding looked over, a bit of worry in his gray eyes. Wei Jia waved his hand. He lightly coughed, a bit of weariness in his eyes. It's fine. As he looked at Qin Yu's door and thought about how today's events would surely be noticed by others, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Because of Yuya, things had finally come to this point. Would His Highness feel regret now? In truth, Qin Yu didn't regret anything. It wasn't that he didn't think about it, but that thinking about it now was useless. It was just a waste of energy. The Chu Empire's 30-million-year celebration was held as scheduled. On this day, Ing Capital's Great Array Formation was completely opened. The phantoms of 9 dragons descended from the heavens, each one 1,000 miles large. They circled around the city and roared. Trillions of auspicious clouds gathered, sprinkling down a golden rain. Whether it was the grand ceremony or the scale, it was one of the highest in the world. Although the second-class guests of the several military camps in the capital weren't able to enter Ing Capital, they were still able to observe the grand and boundless momentum of the grand ceremony. Qin Yu stood in the courtyard, looking at Ing Capital that was covered in a dazzling divine light. His expression was calm. After the grand ceremony, the Sea of Purgatory would soon open. He hoped that everything would go smoothly. As the grand ceremony began, news spread throughout the Chu Empire. His Majesty the Emperor placed great importance on the opening of the Sea of Purgatory. As long as a cultivator entered the sea, they would obtain the qualifications to meet His Majesty. The great Chu Emperor was a character that stood high above the 9-layered heavens. Besides important ministers of the court, there were very few people that were able to see His Majesty's face. Moreover, His Majesty held him in such high regard. If there were some people who were hesitant before the opening of the Sea of Purgatory, now their eyes were shining with a sharp light. It was clear that this was a chance for them to make a name for themselves in front of His Majesty. If they could grasp this opportunity, they could soar to the heavens in the future. In particular, the 4 assistant ministers each chose their own outstanding juniors from their families. After this matter was confirmed, the spots to enter the Sea of Purgatory became even more precious. The entire Ing capital was stirred up. The cabinet chief and vice chief sat across from each other. The tea on the table was already cold, but the two of them didn't have any thoughts of drinking it. They glanced at each other and bitterly smiled. The 4 cabinet chiefs had revered statuses. If it weren't for those above interfering, no one would dare to inquire about their actions. It seemed that His Majesty the Emperor had already made up his mind. He didn't hesitate to use the lives of court ministers and noble juniors to trap the demonic path Saint Sun and Mirror Moon Palace Master into a desperate situation. His Majesty the Emperor's personality is becoming increasingly callous. The vice chief lightly sighed. As he thought of his 2nd son and 4th grandson on the list, he couldn't help but feel a bit sour in his heart. There was a bit more resentment in his voice. The cabinet chief frowned. He said in a low voice, "Dongqing, be careful with your words. You and I come from humble backgrounds. The reason we have our current status is all because of His Majesty's grace. We cannot disappoint His grace." After a slight pause, he said, The juniors of my family are born to be outstanding people and have also received His Majesty's grace. Not to mention that the Sea of Purgatory isn't without a chance of survival. Even if we take their lives, so what? As the vice chief finished speaking, he immediately regretted it. He stood up and bowed. Thank you for Brother Yuanqing's reminder. I forgot my manners. The cabinet chief waved his hand and changed the topic. I have always cared about my blood kin, but I have miscalculated in this matter. In order to consider the overall situation, His Majesty won't say too much. But after the Sea of Purgatory, he won't be able to maintain his current status. The third chief had always coveted the Sea of Purgatory, and the second chief naturally knew this. But as he heard this, he didn't feel much joy. If Xiong Hanhai dared to secretly play tricks and leave behind the truly outstanding juniors of his family, this could be considered a form of courage. At the very least, he wouldn't dare to do such a thing. Even if he lost his position as a vice chief, he could still preserve the future of his family. As for what the gains and losses were, it was hard to say. After speaking a few more words, the second chief bid his farewells. But when he appeared in front of others, he had to put on a calm and unperturbed appearance. Although those in high positions were bright and beautiful, they also had hidden pains that no one knew about. The cabinet chief drank a mouthful of cold tea. The sour taste penetrated his heart. He closed his eyes and gently sighed. Only if more people died in court and something happened to the demonic path Saint Sun and Mirror Moon Palace's master would His Majesty be able to cleanly shirk responsibility and shut up the mouths of the immortal path and demonic path. Realizing this, he extinguished any thoughts of persuading His Majesty to change his mind. He personally selected the juniors that he valued the most and added them to the list. If the dignified, direct descendant of the cabinet chief was buried in the Sea of Purgatory, who would dare to splash dirty water on His Majesty? It had to be known that His Majesty valued the cabinet chief the most. This was a matter known to the world. No matter what the result was, the cabinet chief's mansion would inevitably favor him even more. But as he thought about how this was done with the blood of his descendants, he couldn't bring himself to be happy. The cabinet chief summoned his trusted steward and ordered him to select a batch of maids from the mansion and give them to all the juniors that were about to enter the Sea of Purgatory. In order to guard against all contingencies, the juniors of noble families would be temporarily bestowed with women before they ventured into danger. Perhaps they could leave behind some of their bloodline so that if something happened, they could have a successor. This matter wouldn't arouse any suspicions. After the steward received the order, he immediately began to make arrangements. The cabinet chief stood up. The weariness and bitterness in his eyes completely vanished, leaving behind only a light and tenacious expression. His face was filled with dignity once more. This was because he was the cabinet chief of Great Chu. Your Highness, have you really decided to enter the Sea of Purgatory? The man's voice was filled with worry. The woman remained calm. Yes. The man hesitated for several breaths of time. He cupped his hands together and said, Since your Highness has already decided, I will follow and lend your Highness a helping hand. The woman was overjoyed. That's great. With you helping me, there will definitely be some harvests in the Sea of Purgatory. A moment later, the man walked out of the hall. He looked up at the sunlight, a worried look on his face. This person was Tianyan. His original intention was to stop His Highness, but as he thought about His Highness' current situation, he couldn't bring himself to say anything. Whatever, he would just consider this as repaying His Highness for saving his life. The worst result would be that he would have to return his life to His Highness. Northeast capital city, military camp, a courtyard. This was the encampment of a small country's diplomatic mission. Everyone here, including the envoy, weren't allowed to enter in capital. Their status was low and no one paid attention to them. In a room, a man and a woman sat across from each other. The man was tall and strong, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He had a dignified appearance, and his movements were graceful and dignified. The woman across from him slightly lowered her head, but just the side of her face was enough to stir one's soul. Wei, the Sea of Purgatory is not ordinary. Big Brother only has you left. Listen to me and wait for me here." The woman shook her head, her voice calm. "I only have Big Brother left. Wei. Big Brother, there is no need to say anything more. I have already made up my mind." The man frowned. After a long period of silence, he finally sighed. "You must agree to follow all arrangements. Otherwise, no matter what happens, I will not let you enter the sea of purgatory. I will listen to Big Brother." On the 7th day after the great celebration, news spread out from the Great Chu Imperial Palace. 3 days later, His Majesty the Emperor would summon all the cultivators that entered the Sea of Purgatory and personally open the sealing array. Qin Yu and the 49 demonic path cultivators rode atop horses and finally stepped into Ing capital. As he walked out from the shadow of the towering city gates, his expression was light. But as he thought about the upcoming meeting with the Emperor, he felt a bit restless. Reality proved that Qin Yu had been a bit too sensitive. The summoning ceremony was held outside Harmony Hall in front of the Imperial Palace. Tens of thousands of people gathered there. One couldn't see the end of the crowd. The Emperor sat on the dragon throne atop the 1,000-layer platform, his aura surging around him. It was hard to clearly see his appearance. From start to finish, there wasn't the slightest bit of impropriety. As he finished speaking, the Chu Emperor stood up. His figure wasn't too great, but at this time it seemed as if he were higher than the heavens, as if he were stepping on the earth beneath his feet. The majesty of an emperor blotted out the heavens and earth, leaving one in awe. He lifted a hand and pointed a finger into the void. In the next moment, endless turbulence descended, as if a violent storm had arrived. The entire sky turned into a raging sea. Between the layers of waves, a gray entrance to the world appeared in front of everyone. Although the Sea of Purgatory was named after a sea, it wasn't a true sea. Only the word purgatory was worthy of its name. The moment the entrance opened, an invisible infernal energy surged outwards. Although it was imprisoned by Ing Capital's Great Array formation and couldn't recklessly spread out, it still caused the skies above the capital city to change color. In the blink of an eye, night fell. Chapter 570/P. The dark sky hung low, and the clouds seemed to overlap with the mountains in the distance. Some kind of vegetation that looked like withered branches grew on the black ground, and every branch of different thickness was covered with sharp thorns. Suddenly, 7 specks of light appeared in the quiet air and rapidly expanded outwards. When the light faded, a figure could be seen in each of the specks. Qin Yu glanced around at Wei Jia and the others, feeling a bit more at ease. The demon envoy's arrangements hadn't gone wrong. With the 6 of them by his side, his safety would be greatly increased. Wei Jia took a deep breath, and a complicated expression flashed in his eyes. In the blink of an eye, he became calm again. He cupped his hands and said, "Sir, there are earth terminus thorns growing below, and they can produce hallucinogenic effects. If you feel uncomfortable, just take out the sachet and smell it a few times." Seeing Qin Yu nod, Wei A gestured with his hand. Wei Bi and the others spread out to protect him. As for the elusive Wei Ding, he vanished once more. "Sir, let's go." Whoosh! The group quickly went far away. As one of the great Chu Empire's guardian god beasts, the water demon slumbered deep within the Sea of Purgatory all year round. It was a forbidden danger zone that no one could step into. With only a month of time, he didn't know what troubles he would encounter along the way, so he naturally didn't dare to delay. Qin Yu's eyes fell on Wei Jia and then on Wei Yi and the others who had a tacit understanding of each other. Their movements were orderly, as if they were quite familiar with the Sea of Purgatory. Had he been here before? But just as this thought appeared, it was dispelled by Qin Yu. According to the demon envoy, the Sea of Purgatory had only been opened several times since the founding of the Great Chu Empire. The last time could be traced back to over 7 million years ago. How could there be a creature in this world that could live for such an endless amount of time? He was probably overthinking things. Shen Yuanin's face was covered with a veil. Her cold eyes were like crescent moons in the night sky, indifferent and distant, without the least bit of emotion. The 12 female cultivators behind her knelt on one knee. All of their figures were graceful and beautiful, but their faces were stiff, as if they were masks. Not far away, a demon beast with horns on its head and black diamond-shaped scales was cut into 13 pieces. The cuts were as smooth as a mirror. The wounds seemed to be wrapped by an invisible membrane, and not a single drop of blood flowed out, but the air was still filled with the smell of blood. The smell of blood did not come from the dead beasts, but from the 12 beautiful women kneeling on the ground. "Palace Master, it's time for us to move." Xinyuani nodded. Her feet lightly stepped forwards, and her body floated away like a feather. The 12 female cultivators behind her slapped the ground and followed behind her like shadows. Zhang Lingtian lowered his head and looked at the black wound on his arm. He frowned and said in a deep voice, "Be careful, something is not right." Sensing the worried gaze from the side, he turned his head and said, "Don't worry, Wei Wei. A mere poison can't hurt me." Vivian shook her head and handed Zhang Lingtian an antidote. Even though it was useless, Zhang Lingtian still took it and swallowed it. "Is it okay now?" Several people in the group saw the young Mrs. Worried expression. Although no one said anything, their expressions were very ugly. Although what happened just now was sudden, they were safe and sound, but the young master was injured. This was simply unforgivable. If something happened to the young master, they wouldn't be able to atone for their sins, even if they died 10,000 times. All of them secretly swore in their hearts that they would definitely be 120% cautious and not make any mistakes. However, at this moment, following a cry of alarm, the team immediately fell into chaos. Wei Jia's expression was unsightly. Although he had been extremely careful along the way, he had still alarmed 4 demonic beasts, and the one in front of him was especially powerful. Although it hadn't stepped into the tribulation immortal realm, its pure destructive might wasn't weak at all. It took a great deal of effort to kill it. Although Qin didn't know what this meant, he could feel the dignified expressions of the true demon guards and knew that something must have gone wrong. And indeed, Wei Jia said in a low voice, "My lord, the Sea of Purgatory's monster beasts live in different areas. Generally speaking, there shouldn't be 2 tyrannical monster beasts appearing in the periphery. I ask my lord to be more cautious. This subordinate feels that there is something strange about the Sea of Purgatory today." Qin nodded, but at this time his complexion changed. "Be careful." He stepped forwards and the ground suddenly collapsed. His figure shot up into the skies. In the next moment, the earth shattered and several black tentacles reached out. Unfortunately, the true demon guards had received Qin Yu's warning, causing them to fall into thin air. The black tentacles rapidly retracted, sweeping away the corpse of the monster beast. Then there was the scalp-tingling sound of flesh and bone being separated. As Wei Jia saw the tentacles underground, his pupils shrank. But as he heard the sound of swallowing flesh, he stiffened. "My lord, this subordinate is holding it back. I ask my lord to quickly leave." With a loud shout, gray energy surged between Wei Jia's hands, condensing into a giant saber. He leapt down and chopped down. Bang! There was a heaven-shaking explosion. A massive crack appeared in the ground, revealing a giant and terrifying body below. The slippery surface of its body was torn apart, and dark green mucus gushed out. Pained and angry roars echoed out from underground. The terrifying life form hidden underground tightened its muscles, pressing its wounds together. Soon after, there was the sound of breaking air. Several black tentacles rushed out like bolts of lightning. Wei Jia didn't resist, allowing these tentacles to pull him underground. "Your Highness, hurry and leave." Wei Yi and the others rushed underground. At some unknown time, the hidden Wei Ding had already landed in a crack in the ground, the saber in his hand sinking into his flesh and blood. Rumble, rumble. Like an earth dragon turning over, the earth violently shook and waves rose up. In the blink of an eye, the terrifying life form, Wei Jia, and the others were submerged. But from deep underground, muffled sounds echoed out, indicating that a fierce battle was occurring. Qin Yu frowned. After a moment of silence, he took a deep breath and was about to step forwards. But at this time, the cosmic sea cross bell in his soul space began to hum and tremble. He looked up. In the distance, a black mountain ridge was shaking and collapsing. Something was rising up from underground, and there was more than one. Qin Yu's eyes dimmed for a moment, but he immediately restrained it. He turned without hesitation and held away. He didn't look back. It was only when he could no longer hear the deep roars and the rumbling of the earth that he stopped. Looking back, he could see that the gray skies were filled with interweaving clouds and fog. They were like mountains that wanted to crush people to pieces. Before Qin Yu came to the Chu Empire, he had carefully researched information about the Sea of Purgatory. With his status as the Holy Palace's Saint's son, he had access to nearly the highest levels of information, so he knew a great deal about the Sea of Purgatory. Wei Jia and the others were tyrannical to the extreme, but not too long after entering the Sea of Purgatory, they had encountered a calamity. Although this place was dangerous, it absolutely couldn't reach today's degree. For a time, Qin Yu didn't think that it was because his and Shun Yuanin's identities had been exposed that the Chu Empire's great emperor wanted to kill them, leading to the current situation. As he thought about how Wei Jia and the others had likely perished, Qin Yu felt a bit of bitterness in his chest. Although he hadn't known them for a long time, these people had wholeheartedly protected him. Even though they knew there was a slim chance of survival, they hadn't hesitated at all. However, these emotions tumbled for a moment before he suppressed them. Wei Jia and the others had used their lives as the price to allow him to escape unscathed. Only by living on would he be able to repay them. Now, Qin Yu had two choices in front of him. One was to quickly retreat and leave the Sea of Purgatory. This place was strange and filled with great dangers. This was the best way to preserve his life. The second was to continue deeper. But as he thought about how the periphery was already so dangerous, who knew how terrifying the Forbidden Zone would be? This choice, but before Qin Yu could think this through, a deep roar sounded out from behind him. He turned around to see several people rapidly fleeing, as well as a giant figure chasing after them. This was a half-rotten corpse. Beneath its tattered clothes was a large expanse of dark purple flesh and blood, and one could clearly see the bones within. It held a giant machete in its hand. The machete had been broken in half, and the cut was blood red. Looking at it, one could see that the blood had already congealed, but the feeling it gave off was that it was still flowing and full of vitality. At this time, Qin Yu's first thought was that he didn't know what sort of life form could leave behind such blood. Then, from the depths of his heart, he began to tremble. Although they hadn't fought yet, he could tell just from its aura that this corpse was absolutely terrifying. "Fellow Taoist ahead, save me!" Shouts sounded out from behind him. Qin Yu turned and ran. Even if he wanted to leave now, there was no way out. But soon, his complexion darkened. The several people behind him chased closely behind him, but the corpse was getting closer and closer. There was a pitiful scream. A woman was grabbed by the corpse, her face draining of blood. "Save me! Brother Thunder, save me!" Unfortunately, the several people in front didn't even turn around. They only cared about running for their lives. The corpse's hands suddenly tore the woman in half. As it ran, it took great bites. But there was a hole in the corpse's stomach, and the flesh and blood it swallowed fell into its stomach before falling out. When someone turned around and saw this, they were scared out of their wits. They screamed and ran even faster. Qin Yu suddenly turned around. He could clearly hear the flesh and bones in his legs creaking. But in the next moment, an even more ferocious strength burst forth. The power of an emperor step demon body was revealed at this moment. Lei Fong stubbornly stared at Qin Yu. The demonic paths, true demon guards, all had powerful mortal bodies. If he could make them bleed, then his powerful and delicious blood energy would definitely draw this corpse away. His eyes turned cold. He lifted a hand and punched forwards. Qin Yu's complexion changed, and an icy coldness appeared in his eyes. He flicked his sleeves, scattering the incoming strength. Then, he turned and coldly glared at Lei Fong. He stepped forwards, propelling himself forwards. At the same time, the strength that he had smashed into the earth erupted after a short period of preparation. Lei Fong and the others just happened to pass through this area. The sudden explosion submerged them, causing their speed to inevitably drop. Suddenly, a stone flew out, smashing into the chest of one of the men. He tumbled to the ground and crawled up, wanting to continue running. But at this time, a cold and hard palm had already grabbed onto his ankle. Ah! A desperate howl sounded out once more. Lei Fong's face was covered in dust, and he was in a distressed state. In that instant, he could clearly feel a bone-chilling aura wrapping around his body. In that moment of life or death, Lei Fong had kicked the stone away to strike down Shui Sansheng. Only then was he able to avoid disaster. He had nearly fallen into the hands of the corpse. Lei Fong was panic-stricken. He looked at Qin Yu's back, his eyes filled with even more hatred. That bastard! He had completely forgotten that he was the one who harbored evil intentions in the first place. Moreover, there were several people that had been chasing after Qin Yu, trying to divert the disaster onto him. After killing 2 people, the corpse's desire to hunt seemed to be satisfied. The roars of the corpse gradually quieted down, and the cold Yin aura that shrouded everyone dissipated. A moment later, Lei Fong turned his head and saw that the corpse had already disappeared. He let out a long breath of relief, a look of joy on his face as he subconsciously slowed down. Looking forwards, Qin Yu's figure had already gone far away. All that remained was a black that vanished from sight after several breaths of time. Chapter 571. In Capital, the residence of the 3rd Assistant Governor was grand and luxurious. In the depths of a garden, the Lord Assistant Governor sat in his study. His eyes were slightly closed, his complexion calm. After an unknown period of silence, he suddenly opened his eyes and looked out at the blooming flowers outside the window. A gentle breeze blew past, and the petals swayed, sending forth bursts of fragrance that refreshed the heart. The Lord Assistant Governor took a deep breath and said in a soft voice, "It should begin." There was a faint smile on his lips, his heart incomparably relaxed. All these years of patience and caution had finally borne sweet fruit. Soon, the world would be thrown into turmoil. But the Lord Assistant Governor didn't feel any guilt, because this was the price they had to pay. Everyone in this world owes them a great debt. See, of purgatory. Under the dim skies, 2 men and 1 woman silently walked forwards. Their bodies were wrapped in a layer of blood-red light, dark and deep. Not too far away, on a rock, the monster beast lowered its head and tore at its flesh and blood. Looking at the clothes it wore when it was alive, as well as its scattered white limbs, it should have been a beautiful woman. But now, this was only the monster beast eating flesh and blood. The sound of flesh and bone being torn apart was enough to make one's scalp tingle. But the 3 people walking forwards didn't seem to see or hear anything at all. They looked straight ahead, not retreating at all. The monster beast's ears moved. It looked up, revealing its bloody mouth. Its cruel eyes fell on the 3 people. In the next moment, its body froze. With a plaintive cry, it threw away the flesh and blood in its mouth and ran away with its tail between its legs. It was as if there was something on these 3 people that terrified it. Soon, the 3 people climbed up a mountain and stopped in a hollow. The man in front held a disc in his hand, constantly pacing back and forth. After turning around several times, the man stopped. He lifted his foot and stomped down. The ground in front of him collapsed, revealing a bottomless hole. It was unknown where it led to, but faint traces of aura overflowed from within. Half of it was black and the other half was white, intertwining with each other. He handed the disc to the man behind him. Then, without hesitation, he jumped into the hole in the ground. Quietly, like a stone falling into a river, there wasn't a single wave. But he had changed something. Between the black and white, there was a twisted blood-red color. The air was thick with the smell of blood. The second man did not frown. He handed the disc to the third man and jumped into the cave. Only the woman remained. Her features were as beautiful as a painting, and her skin was fair. As she watched the blood-red color grow thicker, there was not the slightest fluctuation in her eyes. Who would have thought that just a few days ago, she, a young lady of an assistant governor's mansion, would be so frightened that she wet her pants on the spot when she found out that she had suddenly entered the list? He raised his hand and tapped the disc. Blood-colored patterns appeared on its surface, interweaving to form a strange face. It opened its mouth and howled soundlessly. The entrance of the cave trembled, sucking in the black and white auras that had almost been soaked in blood. The next moment, the hole disappeared. The woman put away the disc and turned to leave. Her light footsteps soon faded into the distance. Chinyu looked at the ruins of the city that still existed. He let out a breath of relief, a relaxed expression on his face. He took several steps forwards and flew in like a shadow. As soon as he landed, he frowned and looked up. His eyes were icy cold. The pair of blood-red eyes behind the door hesitated for a moment before finally moving away. Seeing that the other party didn't bother him, Chinyu moved. After several breaths of time, he submerged himself into the ruins. A moment later, he found an empty room. After carefully sensing that there weren't any dangers, Chinyu carefully pushed open the rotten wooden door. Dust fluttered in the air as he stepped inside. He sat down cross-legged, took out several pills, and swallowed them. Chinyu let out a long breath, his face paler than before. With his current cultivation, he could even fight an early calamity immortal realm cultivator. Even in the entire land of divinity and demons, he could be considered an absolute powerhouse. But today, in the sea of purgatory, he was in an incomparably distressed state. If it weren't for the sharp senses of the cosmic sea crossbell, he feared he wouldn't have been able to arrive here in one piece. It was impossible to verify the origins of the city ruins in the sea of purgatory. In the legends, it was built countless years ago, and although it was now in ruins, there was still some residual power left behind. The various monster beasts and evil beings that lived in the sea of purgatory wouldn't easily approach the ruins. Of course, this didn't mean that the ruins were an absolutely safe place. When he first entered the ruins, the blood-red eyes that stared at Chinyu from behind the door were the greatest terror of the ruins. Those were dried corpses. It was rumored that they were the residents of the city that lived in ancient times. For some unknown reason, they had become like this. Within the demonic path sea of Purgatory's database, there were detailed records of the dried corpses in the ruins. These were a group of monsters that couldn't be killed. Even if they were torn to pieces, they could still be reborn. And these monsters had a perverted desire for the flesh and blood of living beings. If they encountered one, they would fight to the death. Luckily, these dried corpses were also imprisoned. Most of them could only stay in their own houses or move around in a fixed and narrow range. As long as one was careful and didn't intrude into their range of activity, there wouldn't be too much danger. But the originally dangerous sea of Purgatory had now become a land of death. Could the relatively safe ruins of the city still be believed? Chinyu didn't know. Thus, he decided to rest here for a while. Once his body recovered, he would immediately leave. Suppressing these thoughts, he closed his eyes and began to adjust his breathing. As Chinyu was recovering, several more guests arrived outside the ruins of the city. Shin Yuanin's face was covered with a veil, and her entire body was spotless. Her temperament became increasingly cold and indifferent. Of the 12 female cultivators that follow behind her, only 7 were left. The rest were nowhere to be seen. Their fate could be imagined. Their clothes fluttered in the wind. The group of 8 flew into the ruins. Only now did they turn around. A massive shadow stood far away from the ruins. Its 4 eyes deeply looked at them before it turned and left. Bang! Bang! With each step, the earth shook. On the ruined, desolate, and deathly silent street, the doors of the houses on both sides emitted creaking sounds. Pairs of blood-red eyes appeared, staring at them through the cracks. Or, it was more accurate to say that the vast majority of eyes were focused on Shen Yuanin. Her eyes were indifferent. As she swept over these greedy and cruel eyes, they were as cold as jade, without the least bit of fluctuation. Suddenly, there was a loud roar. The heavily decayed doors instantly shattered into countless pieces, wrapped in gray gas. They tore through the air, emitting shrill screeches. A purple and red figure followed closely behind. This was a tall and withered corpse. All of its flesh and blood had withered into a thin layer that clung to the surface of its bones. Its hair was as white as withered grass, wildly ruffling in the wind. It roared, revealing withered yellow teeth. In its deeply sunken eye sockets, two blood-red eyes were filled with greed and bloodthirst. This was a corpse that could leave the room for a short period of time. Xin Yuanin lifted a hand and pointed at the void in front of her. There were no fluctuations of strength at all, as if she were a light breeze. It was as if firecrackers had been lit in the chest of the mummy that pounced at him as fast as lightning. By the time it fell to the ground, it was already a pile of purple and red flesh. Its mouth bit down on the ground, slowly wriggling forward. Xin Yuanin turned and walked away. The female cultivators behind her silently followed. When they disappeared around the corner of the street, several wooden doors opened at the same time, and several corpses rushed out, snatching away the pieces of flesh on the ground. The wriggling head was held in the arms of one of the corpses. The corpse returned to the room and bit down on the head, happily sucking it up. After several breaths of time, the street quieted down once more, restoring its original tranquility, and an empty room that could be temporarily set foot in appeared. On the other end of the street, Lei Feng gulped. His face was a bit pale, but his eyes were turning, clearly calculating something. After several breaths of time, he turned and whispered something to the two people beside him. The three of them turned and followed. The current sea of purgatory was far too dangerous. If they could grab onto a thigh, that would naturally be for the best. There was no day or night in the sea of purgatory. The gray skies and tumbling fog filled the skies all day, leaving one's mind feeling particularly depressed. Qinyu opened his eyes and silently calculated. Another 2 days passed, and he immediately frowned. In the blink of an eye, 6 days had passed, but he still hadn't been able to enter the depths of the sea of purgatory. If things continued like this, he feared he wouldn't be able to find Shuaba before the time limit was up. As for whether or not he could miss the deadline, that was impossible. Otherwise, Ing City's Great Array formation would close. Unless the outside world opened it on its own initiative, it would be impossible to leave. It had to be known that Ing City's Great Array formation had been completed since the founding of the Great Chu Empire. After 30 million years of constant strengthening and improvement, even a calamity immortal would find it hard to shake it. And the next time it opened would be several million years from now. No matter who it was, if they stayed here, then they would turn into dirt. He couldn't delay any longer. Qinyu stood up. After sensing that there was nothing wrong with the outside world, he flicked his sleeves and opened the door. His pace wasn't fast, but as he rose and fell, his figure flashed by. In several blinks of an eye, Qinyu arrived at the edge of the ruins. He stepped forwards and shot into the skies. But at this time, his complexion changed. With a shout, he came to a sudden stop and punched out. Bang! There was a dull sound like a tsunami erupting. A giant net appeared in nothingness, dented by the strength of his fist. Qinyu borrowed the strength of the shaking to draw back. In the next moment, the net rolled up, wrapping around him. The figure of a giant spider appeared outside the ruins. It stared at the retreating Qinyu and screamed in anger. If it weren't for Qinyu being a moment faster and being wrapped up in that spiderweb, he feared he would have become food for this spider. Qinyu's heart chilled. He suddenly felt a bit numb in his hand, and his complexion changed. He looked down to see that a layer of flesh and blood had been corroded away. This bit of poison was instantly absorbed by his index finger. The flesh and blood around the wound wriggled and soon regenerated. Roar! The giant spider outside the city suddenly roared. Its compound eyes flashed with an ominous light. It stared at Qinyu, its eyes filled with blazing heat and greed. Its giant limbs danced about, tearing open fissures in the ground. Qin Yu's heart sank. He found a reason. That spider web was stained with a portion of his flesh and blood. The powerful blood vitality of an emperor-level demon body was undoubtedly a fatal temptation to monster beasts. Roar! A deep and low roar sounded out. The giant spider seemed to feel danger, but before it could escape, a fist arrived and sent it flying away. A figure gradually became clear in the smoke and dust. He walked in front of the spider web, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath, an intoxicated expression on his rotten face. Qin Yu's pupils shrank. This figure was the one he encountered not too long ago, the one with the terrifying aura. Perhaps it was because he had swallowed and absorbed some flesh and blood essence, but the state of his body's decay had improved. Black energy lingered around him. His soul suddenly throbbed. A terrifying feeling surged out from the depths of his heart, causing Qin Yu to stiffen. He fiercely looked up, his eyes colliding with the corpse's. A deep and low voice sounded out in his mind. "My prey, you cannot escape." He had been targeted. However, the corpse was the same as the spider. It clearly dreaded the ruins. Its eyes blazed with heat, but it hesitated and didn't move forwards. Qin Yu calmed down a little. His thoughts raced, but before he could think of a plan to escape, a heaven-shaking explosion sounded out in the southeast direction of the city ruins. What followed was the excited howls of the corpses. In the blink of an eye, countless houses collapsed. With loud, rumbling sounds, dust shot into the skies. Shen Yuanin lifted a hand to wipe the corner of her mouth. Blood dyed the back of her pale fingers, making her look even more startling. There was a pool of blood on the ground. Cold air rose up from it, and there were even tiny pieces of ice mixed within. The hidden dangers within her body were becoming increasingly serious. Listening to the chaos outside, Shen Yuanin furrowed her eyebrows. Then, she composed herself. She put on her veil and pushed open the door. She was once again the cold and venerated master of Nine Heaven Mirror Moon Palace, not weakened in the least. With a flick of her sleeves, several corpses that broke through the walls froze in midair, falling to the ground and breaking into countless pieces. "Let's go." Her blood was enough to drive these corpses crazy. They couldn't stay in the ruins any longer. Rumble, rumble. From all directions, the sounds of walls collapsing and houses collapsing constantly sounded out. It was unknown how many corpses were crazily rushing towards them with bloodshot eyes. Lei Feng's face turned green. He thought he had found a powerful thigh, but who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, he would have to flee for his life? But now, he had no other choice. If he left these female immortal sect cultivators, he feared he would die even faster. Shen Yuanin stepped forwards, still calm and composed. Her attacks were light and gentle, but wherever she went, there was no longer any life left behind. The sublime emotion forgetting code, forgetting one's 7 emotions and 6 desires, as well as compassion for all living beings in the world. When she attacked, there was no room for mercy. The roars of the corpses rapidly approached. The loud rumbling was enough to prove their astonishing numbers. Qin Yu's complexion immediately paled. A leaky house met a rainy night. The rotten corpses waited outside, and the corpses went berserk within. For a time, there was nowhere to go. Bang! At the end of his line of sight, several houses were smashed to pieces by the corpses. They howled in excitement as they crazily rushed inside. Qin Yu looked up. What he saw was the figure of a group of women. Unlike their delicate appearance, each one of them was swift and fierce. In particular, the veiled female cultivator seemed to have cultivated some great ice-attribute supernatural power. As soon as they approached the corpses, they were instantly turned into ice sculptures. Behind them were 3 men. They were bitterly resisting the attacks of the corpses. "Mim, it's them." Qin Yu's eyes darkened. Lei Feng seemed to sense something. He turned to meet Qin Yu's eyes. After a moment of surprise, he clenched his teeth. The demonic path had always been protective of their own. Although he had a high status, he didn't want to be targeted by the demonic path. Since he had attacked that day, Lei Fong didn't plan on letting Qin Yu live any longer. It was just that the corpses had suddenly retreated, and he had let Qin Yu escape in a moment of carelessness. Originally, he had felt a bit restless about this, but since he had encountered them today, it was naturally for the best. Lei Fong's eyes brightened. He lifted his hand, took out a purple jade pendant, and crushed it to pieces. Bang! A halo of purple light erupted, wrapping around the surrounding corpses. But it didn't shrink and crush the corpses. Rather, it suppressed as many corpses as possible and moved them away. Looking at the purple halo of light howling towards him, killing intent rose in Qin Yu's eyes. He instantly understood Lei Fong's sinister intentions. To divert disaster to someone else, to kill with a borrowed knife. Was this a move he had already used? Pa! The purple halo of light shattered, and a rain of corpses rained down from the skies. Although they were more fascinated by Shun Yuanin's aura, the smell of the flesh and blood in front of them wasn't bad either. Seeing that they couldn't break through the layers of encirclement, after a brief moment of hesitation, the corpses roared out loud. They adjusted their positions and hurtled towards Qin Yu. Humph! With a cold snort, Qin Yu stomped his feet. The floor tiles instantly shattered into countless pieces that floated in the air. With a flick of his sleeves, each piece was endowed with a terrifying strength. They tore through the air and shot out in all directions. Bang, bang. The corpses were pierced through one after another. A formidable strength continued to act upon them, sending them flying away. In the blink of an eye, the area around Qin Yu had been cleared. Lei Fong's heart shook. On that day, Qin Yu had directly fled and hadn't revealed his true cultivation. This strike was already astonishing enough. With such a cultivation, how could he be easy to deal with in the demonic path? Now that both sides had formed a death grudge, it was impossible to resolve it. If he didn't die in the sea of purgatory, he feared there would be trouble in the future. Lei Fong's eyes turned. He loudly said, "Fellow fairies, that person is extremely strong. He might be able to share the pressure for us." Shen Yuanin's eyes were faint as she looked at Qin Yu. Although he wore black armor and she couldn't see his appearance, she didn't know why her heart trembled. But this trembling of his mind only lasted for a moment before it was suppressed by a powerful will. His indifferent eyes turned even colder. At this time, Shen Yuanin suddenly felt that she loathed him. The 7 female cultivators at her side saw the palace master remain silent. They turned around and flew straight towards Qin Yu. Although they seemed to be smoothly slaughtering the corpses, their losses were extremely terrifying and they couldn't maintain this state for too long. Sharing the pressure was undoubtedly the best choice. As for whether or not doing this would place Qin Yu in danger, they didn't care at all. As long as the palace master was safe and sound, let alone one person dying, even if 100 million lives were lost, so what? Qin Yu's eyes were ice cold. He swept his eyes over these people. In his eyes, these female cultivators were the same as Lei Fong. Although he feared the corpses, Qin Yu didn't want to fall into a tide of corpses. Moreover, these people had ill intentions. Qin Yu's eyes became even colder. He took a step forwards and rushed out of the ruins of the city, speeding away in another direction. Roar! The corpses roared. The ground trembled with every step he took. Lei Fong, who was filled with excitement as he rushed towards Qin Yu, suddenly shivered. His face paled and he screamed, "Don't go over there! That corpses are too terrifying." Shen Yuanin stopped. It wasn't because of Lei Fong's warning, but because she felt a tyrannical aura from that corpses that left her feeling dread. How terrifying! The corpses looked over and their eyes brightened. But after a moment of hesitation, they didn't stop. They continued running in the direction that Qin Yu had fled. This little girl's blood vitality was excellent, but comparatively speaking, he preferred the little fellow in front of him. That aura was really familiar, as if he had eaten it a long, long time ago. Chapter 572 Hum. Its body trembled, and the corpse instantly turned into black fog, vanishing where it stood. As Qin Yu ran away, his heart fiercely shrank. He stepped into the ground and forcefully came to a stop. Looking up, he could see black fog gushing out from thin air. It tumbled and collapsed inward, condensing into a figure. Little thing, where do you think you're running to? A deep voice sounded out in his mind. Qin Yu took a deep breath and continued to run away. When he first saw this corpse, he had sensed how strong it was. Today, it was even stronger. He couldn't fight it head-on. But before he ran too far, the black fog appeared once more. The corpse laughed. Don't struggle anymore. Let me eat you up. Freak. Only an idiot wouldn't run. Qin Yu turned and ran without any hesitation. Humph. The corpse sneered. In the next moment, a terrifying aura arrived. It was like a towering divine mountain that suppressed the world. Qin Yu roared out loud. He stepped forwards and his speed rose. In the next moment, the ground around him caved in, revealing a giant palm print. Your reactions are quite fast, but how many times can you dodge? A terrifying feeling appeared once more. Qin Yu dodged to the side. He could hear the creaking of his leg bones in his ears. The Emperor-level demon body was indeed formidable, but it still couldn't withstand the eruption of strength that surpassed its limits. Undying, can you escape? Qin Yu roared out in his heart. Undying's voice was calm. This corpse has some supernatural ability that has locked onto your aura. Unless you block or stop this lock, no matter how far you run, you will be overtaken by it. There are some words that Undying didn't say. He could almost confirm that this corpse was a great figure when it was alive. He couldn't imagine just what it had experienced that could cause such an existence to fall to such a state. Qin Yu's heart sank. His thoughts raced, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. He had already made a decision. Divert the disaster to someone else? You aren't the only ones who know this move. Bang! The ground shook. Qin Yu drew backwards, avoiding another attack from the corpse as he raced towards the ruins of the city. Although the rampage of corpses was terrifying, he had to choose the lesser of two evils. Returning to the ruins would be extremely dangerous, but at least he had a chance to survive. The corpse clearly sensed Qin Yu's intentions. It suddenly roared, its voice like a sharp thorn that drilled into the depths of Qin Yu's mind. Qin Yu staggered and stuffily coughed. Beads of blood flowed out of his mouth and nose as he tumbled around in a distressed manner. Looking at the ground that had caved in by a hair's breadth, Qin Yu gulped. He wasn't in the mood to feel ashamed. Fortunately, he was not far from the ruins of the city. After dodging two more attacks, he could see its figure in the distance. But now, at the edge of the city ruins, there were countless dried corpses. They howled like purplish-red waves, constantly crashing against the city ruins. Even though the corpses were slaughtered in the blink of an eye, they were like moths flying into a flame, not knowing what fear was. Although he couldn't wait to see this group of people die without a grave, the current situation left him with no other choice. Bang! Exerting strength in his legs, he leaped up and landed heavily on the ground like a falling boulder. Countless pieces of mud and stone splattered everywhere, sending the surrounding dried corpses flying. He didn't care about his surroundings. He turned and looked outside the city. The giant corpse had already come to a stop and was staring right at him. It did not come over. Qin Yu's heart relaxed. He let out a long breath of relief. It was only then that he felt his legs ache and he was exhausted. Although it had only been a short moment, every breath of time just now had been spent on the edge of a blade. He had been on the edge of life and death. If he had made the slightest mistake, he would have become a piece of flesh and blood chewed up in the mouth of the corpse. The dried corpses would not give Qin Yu any time to rest. They howled and rushed up, taking the initiative to deliver the flesh and blood to their mouths. Moreover, the taste was quite good, so there was no reason for them to miss it. Qin Yu took a deep breath. With a thought, he vanished from sight. In the next moment, his figure appeared in the Nine-Realm Holy Land's Saint's Sun token space. Looking up, he could clearly see what was happening outside. Although the dried corpses had retained a portion of their consciousness, they clearly didn't have the ability to sense the Saint's Sun token. In addition, Shen Yuanin's aura was constantly releasing temptation. After losing their target, They only hesitated for a moment before turning and rushing back inside. Chinyu sat down cross-legged. He took out a pill and swallowed it, revolving his cultivation to refine it. As Lei Fong saw Chinyu return, he was stunned. Was this boy an idiot? He actually ran back to die. But in the blink of an eye, he saw the corpses guarding outside the city. His entire body froze. Bastard! These dried corpses were already terrifying enough, but they had actually brought back an even more terrifying fellow. The city ruins had a powerful, imprisoning ability towards the dried corpses. They couldn't leave as they pleased, so as long as they could rush out of the ruins, they could escape. It was because of this that when the group reached the edge of the ruins, they were greeted by the dried corpses, all of them desperately trying to stop them. Just as they were about to kill their way out of the encirclement, Chinyu actually came up with such a trick. Once they left the ruins, they feared they would be greeted by the terrifying attacks of the corpses. Looking over, because Chinyu had suddenly disappeared, the corpse was clearly enraged. It roared and black energy tumbled around its body. Seeing this, Lei Fong nearly fainted. He couldn't resign himself to death. He absolutely couldn't. These women from the immortal sect might still have a chance to live, but his hands and feet were weak. Where would he find a chance to escape? That corpse had chased Chinyu away, and now it was chasing him back. It was clear that its true target was him. As long as he could force Chinyu out, the crisis of the corpse could be resolved. Yes, that was it. Lei Fong screamed, "Senior apprentice sisters, that person has wild ambitions. He wants to kill us all. We cannot let him go." Chinyu brought the corpse back and concealed his tracks. Hearing Lei Fong's words, the eyes of the 7 female cultivators turned icy cold. Shen Yuanin frowned. She lifted a hand and pointed at the void. Her fingers seemed light, but was like a falling mountain falling into a great lake. In that instant, great waves surged out, sweeping out in all directions. Within the Saint's Sun token, Qin Yu's complexion changed. He looked at the veiled female cultivator, his eyes cold. In the next moment, the space he was in seemed to synchronize with the outside world. Ripples spread out. Although they were weak and didn't have much killing power, they were enough to force him away. Shua! Qin Yu's figure appeared where he was. Before he could do anything, a pleasant but icy voice sounded out in his ears. The target of the dried corpses is me, and the target of the corpse is you. If we join forces, we might have a chance to survive. Otherwise, we will all die here. Qin Yu had no expression. How can I believe you? If you believe me, then you will live. If you don't believe me, then you will die. Direct enough. He punched out at the dried corpses. As he looked at the corpses waiting outside the ruins, Qin Yu's eyes darkened. All right, I agree. Both of them were smart people. There was no need to speak too much. After exchanging a few words, they understood what the other needed to do. Shen Yuanin lifted a hand and pointed. Wherever a fingertip went, space came to a standstill. The dried corpses wrapped within were directly sealed in ice. Bang! Qin Yu's feet fell. His figure was as fast as lightning as he moved through the stopped space. The frozen corpses shattered one after another. Lei Fong's eyes widened, his mind still in a daze. Wasn't she supposed to kill him? What was she doing? Roar! Several dried corpses roared as they rushed forwards. Shen Yuanin didn't even turn around. She only lightly looked at him. Qin Yu sighed inwardly. He lifted a hand and pressed it down. Space violently shook. The tumbling strength forced the several dried corpses back, but didn't cause any powerful damage to them. The cycle repeated itself. More and more dried corpses surrounded Qin Yu, nearly submerging him. Dealing with them became increasingly difficult. Beads of sweat dripped down his forehead. This wasn't a disguise. Controlling his strength, while also avoiding an astonishing number of dried corpses, was a great challenge for Qin Yu. Outside the ruins, the eyes of the rotten corpse turned cold. It roared out loud. Although it had retained some of its consciousness, it couldn't be compared to when it was alive. This boy was its prey, but this pitiful group of lowly people actually dared to steal him. They were seeking death. With the level of a rotten corpse, although it feared the ruins of the city, it didn't affect it too much. With a loud bang, a giant pit formed in the ground. The edges melted away, turning into some sort of crystal. Black energy tumbled within, constantly condensing into ghost faces. Chin kept an eye on the movements of the rotten corpses. He was overjoyed. He had fallen into their trap. Like a giant boulder falling from the heavens, dozens of dried corpses were instantly crushed into meat patties. As the black fog touched their flesh and blood, black flames ignited. After several breaths of time, the black flames were extinguished, leaving behind nothing but ashes. The nearly undying and indestructible dried corpses were actually as fragile as ants in front of the rotten corpses. They were easily erased. Roar! The rotten corpse reared its head back and roared. A cruel and vicious aura shot into the skies. Even the bloodshot corpses couldn't help but feel fear. They roared and drew back. Without needing a reminder, Shun Yuanin stepped forwards. She lifted her hand and spread her fingers. Beneath the dim light, she looked like a pure white snow lotus blooming. Kacha! Kacha! On the ground, ice lotuses appeared. They were layered upon each other, their branches and leaves distinct. It seemed as if a gust of wind would cause the flowers to sway. In the next moment, all of the ice lotuses bloomed together. The fragrance of flowers filled the air. The rotten corpse's angry and cruel eyes revealed a trace of confusion. The scene in front of him caused fragmented memories to appear in his mind. All of them were fragmented images that he couldn't clearly see. He tried to grasp them, but all he did was make the fragments dissipate even faster. Anger surged from the bottom of his heart. He glared at Shun Yuanin and lifted his hand, ready to strike out. But just as he lifted his arm, the rotten corpse froze. Frost appeared on his fingertips and rapidly spread upwards. In the blink of an eye, his entire arm was frozen over. The ice didn't stop there. It continued to climb up his body. A terrifying chill that could extinguish all life penetrated straight into his soul. The rotten corpse's life state had already undergone a mutation. Whether it was his mortal body or soul, he didn't feel much pain. But as he looked at the ice covering his body, the anger in his chest burned even hotter. The stabbing pain in his head caused him to roar out in anger. Bang! All of the ice on the rotten corpse's body instantly shattered. A terrifying aura continued to spread outwards. The ice lotuses that bloomed on the ground violently trembled, covered in cracks. Every crack was like a terrifying mark left behind by a saber, a spear, a sword, or a halberd. All that was beautiful was destroyed, leaving behind only despair and slaughter. Shun Yuanin took a step back. On the veil covering her face, a mass of blood red appeared and rapidly spread outwards. Her aura suddenly weakened. As Qin Yu saw this scene, he was slightly startled. His impression of her changed a little bit. Not to mention anything else, she was at least professional enough. Even though she knew it was fake, she still worked so hard. He could clearly feel that these injuries were real, and they were very heavy. The sublime lost emotion code. Attack with full strength, without holding anything back. Qin Yu didn't know this, so he was naturally shaken. Even he, the one who set up the trap, was startled. The dried corpses that had gone mad from Shun Yuanin's provocation fell directly into her trap. The eyes of the dried corpses that had been frightened away by the rotten corpse turned even redder. They cried out like wild dogs trying to protect their food. This damned thing wanted to steal their food. Unforgivable. This was absolutely unforgivable. After breaking through Shun Yuanin's imprisonment, the rotten corpse's ferocious nature erupted. It roared as it strode forwards. But as it took a single step, it was drowned out by the raging corpses that rushed at it from all directions. No matter what you are, if you dare to touch our food, then don't think you'll have a good ending. The plan went surprisingly smoothly. Most of the corpses surrounding Qin Yu dispersed, making it much easier to deal with them. It was all because that woman was ruthless enough. Qin Yu sighed inwardly. As he looked over, his face froze. Shun Yuanin's hand hung down. Dark red beads of blood flowed down her fingertips and dripped onto the ground. The impact just now hadn't caused any visible wounds. Then, this blood, at this time, Shun Yuanin lifted a hand. Without expression, she cut open the wound on her palm once more. Blood flowed out, even more freely. She looked up, her eyes indifferent. Qin Yu's face stiffened. After several breaths of silence, he silently cut open his palm. In the air, the tempting smell of blood became increasingly rich. The raging rotten corpses, stimulated by the blood, became increasingly violent. Corpses were sent flying backwards. Very few of them had intact limbs. While they were still in the air, they were wrapped up in black flames and burned to ashes. Perhaps at other times, the threat of death could scare these corpses away. But Shun Yuanin's blood caused them to forget all scruples. The hope of survival was right in front of them. For this, they could disregard everything. Quietly, Shun Yuanin, Qin Yu, and the others escaped from the vortex of slaughter. He confirmed with undying that his aura was still locked onto, looking at the rotten corpses that were slaughtering to their heart's content. Qin Yu gnashed his teeth in hatred. This bastard, just how much did he want to eat him? Even at this time, he still hadn't let go. As he was thinking of how to escape, Shun Yuanin's cold voice sounded out. All of you leave first. The 7 female cultivators shook their heads without hesitation. Lei Fong and the other two's happy expressions froze, their mouths filled with bitterness. Shun Yuanin frowned. This is an order. There was no need to explain it all. It was simple and crude. The 7 female cultivators didn't dare to speak again. They bowed and carefully moved away. Because their 2 main targets hadn't moved, even if the corpses discovered this, they still didn't stop them. As Lei Fong and the other 2 were about to leave, Qin Yu's eyes flashed. The 3 of them cannot leave. If it weren't for Shun Yuanin waiting for an explanation, Lei Fong would have cursed out loud. Brat, do you want to blow me up? Qin Yu lightly said, whether they are rotten corpses or dried corpses, they aren't without intelligence. If too many people leave, it will arouse suspicion and our plan won't work. So, just in case, these 3 must follow us. Although these words seemed forced, Shun Yuanin didn't argue. She lightly said, all right. Although these 3 people had some relationship with the immortal sect, they didn't enter her eyes at all. Shun Yuanin didn't care whether they lived or died. Or, it was more accurate to say that she didn't even care about the 7 female cultivators from the immortal sect. This was because she would have a use for them in the future, so she would protect them. Qin Yu glanced at Lei Fong and the other 2. As he saw their hateful gazes, he sneered inwardly. Holding grudges didn't need to be taught. He no longer cared about his surroundings. Qin Yu's eyes drooped as he waited for news from Undying. As long as the lock disappeared, he could immediately leave. Suddenly, the earth beneath their feet trembled. Qin Yu and Shun Yuanin reacted at nearly the same time. They shot into the skies. Lei Fong and the other 2 were a moment too slow. By the time they reacted, the ground had already shattered and a terrifying maw was sweeping towards them. Within this circular maw were circles of fine fangs. They crisscrossed with each other as if it were a meat grinder. A powerful swallowing strength spread out, sucking in all the dirt and stone. Lei Fong felt a chill run down his spine. He suddenly kicked out. The cultivator behind him miserably cried out and tumbled to the ground, falling into the giant maw. Borrowing the strength of this kick, Lei Fong was able to temporarily escape the swallowing strength. His cultivation wildly erupted as he dragged himself away. After surviving a calamity, before he could even relax, a great strength struck his chest. No! Lei Fong screamed out in despair. He looked up and saw Qin Yu take back his foot. Was this retribution? Before he could finish his thoughts, Lei Fong fell into the giant maw and instantly vanished. Qin Yu met Shun Yuanin's eyes and shrugged. I didn't do it on purpose. This explanation wasn't sincere at all. Shun Yuanin didn't say anything. Her eyes turned even colder and a cold chill rose up from her body. Of course, Qin Yu didn't care. But deep in his eyes, there was still a bit of worry. As he thought, the sudden appearance of a third party broke the battle between the corpses and corpses. Both sides turned their attention back to the two portions of blood food. In that instant, space froze. Chapter 573. Anyone that dared to snatch food from the jaws of a tiger in front of a group of rotten corpses naturally wasn't an ordinary character. The earth cracked apart, and an earthworm creature that was thousands of times larger drilled out. It didn't have a mouth, nose, ears, or eyes. Its mouth was at the end of one end, and its smooth and flexible body was actually covered in a thick layer of armor. The rotten corpse roared, and the earth beneath it turned to powder. Its figure instantly vanished, and in the next moment appeared in front of the creature, its fist smashing down. There was a deep sound like a mountain shaking, and also like the beating of a boundless drum. Where the fist landed, the flesh and blood violently shook, forming ripples that spread outwards. But at this time, the rotten corpse's complexion changed. It tried to pull back its fist, but the armor on the creature's surface suddenly softened like rubber, wrapping around its fist and making it impossible for it to break free. What happened next was beyond everyone's expectations. The part of the creature's body that was hit suddenly opened up, forming a slightly smaller round mouth, and swallowed the rotten corpse into its stomach in one gulp. Undying's voice suddenly sounded out. "Hurry and leave. The lock has disappeared." His voice was a bit nervous. It was clear that his true mood wasn't as calm as he had revealed before. The existence of the rotten corpse also placed a tremendous pressure on him. The more similar an existence was, the more they could understand just how terrifying the other was. The pleasant surprise came so quickly. Chinyu maintained his composure. He looked at the woman across from him, and for some strange reason, he felt a bit restless. However, this subtle feeling was extinguished in the blink of an eye. Chinyu cursed himself for being blinded by lust, but he couldn't help but sigh. This really was a world that looked at appearances. At this time, Shen Yuanin suddenly turned around. Their gazes collided, and Qin Yu's face stiffened. Could she have sensed him? There was a slight tremor. Shen Yuanin was still standing in front of him, but her true body had already left. Outside the ruins, in front of the 7 female cultivators, cold energy rose up and reformed. Without looking back, Shen Yuanin indifferently said, "Let's go." Whoosh! They rapidly flew far away. After losing their prey, the dried corpses were stunned for a moment before falling into a frenzy. They howled and howled, their blood-red eyes stubbornly staring at Chinyu. Even though Chinyu's heart was strong enough, he still felt a chill run down his spine as these blood-red eyes locked onto him. Indeed, a woman's heart was the most poisonous. Just a moment ago, he was still instinctively feeling guilty and uneasy towards her. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, he would be completely betrayed? If he didn't have a way to escape, wouldn't he have to stay here and watch helplessly as he was torn to pieces? Looking at Shen Yuanin's fading figure, Chinyu clenched his teeth. "We're leaving too. You want me to die?" It's not that easy. Space shattered, forming a black hole. It was like a great maw that swallowed Chinyu. Shwa, his aura completely dissipated. The berserk corpses stopped their advance and stared at each other in shock. What was going on? In the blink of an eye, the 2 portions of food ran clean. If you have this ability, why didn't you use it earlier? Are you kidding us? Thus, he became even more furious. The creature that had swallowed the rotting corpse suddenly howled in pain. Its enormous body thrashed wildly on the ground, causing the heavens to collapse and the earth to crack. Flesh and blood disintegrated. A giant hole was torn open in its body, and the rotting corpse leapt down. The creature behind it froze and fell backwards. Then, all of its flesh and blood rapidly withered away. In a breath of time, only a thin layer of skin was left over as it was swept away by the wind. The rotting corpse's withered hair fluttered in the wind. It stared at the place where Chinyu disappeared and punched out its fist. Space shattered, forming a black hole. Just as it was about to drill into it, the newly formed hole violently trembled and then completely collapsed. The rotting corpse angrily roared. But The last bit of aura it had locked onto had already been destroyed. It had lost its prey. Turning around, the rotting corpse rushed towards the group of corpses. A terrifying aura erupted. Faint traces of black fog drilled out from the void, condensing in the skies above the ruins. Time slowly passed. The movements in the ruins became smaller and smaller. The panic-stricken cries of the corpses became weak and fragmented. As for the black fog in the skies above the ruins, it became more and more numerous, gradually condensing into thick clouds. The rotting corpse walked out from the ruins of the city. It lifted a hand and pointed towards the skies. The thick black fog emitted a loud explosion, and black rain began to fall down. Although they were raindrops, as they fell into the ruins, they directly turned into flames. The black flames leapt and wildly spread, burning everything to ashes. Cries of pain, despair, and fear echoed out from the ruins. These were the corpses that were reforming. Their nearly undying and indestructible bodies were like oiled straws in front of the black flames. They had bitterly waited for endless years, withstanding endless torment. But in the end, they didn't manage to wait until the day they were revived. Like this, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, turning into ashes between the heavens and earth, without a single trace left behind. When the black fog scattered and the black flames were extinguished, the ruins of the city had disappeared. All that was left behind was a massive pit in the ground. The edges of the pit had melted into crystals, and black energy surged within. From time to time, pained faces would appear. They faced the gray skies, their mouths opening and closing as if they were roaring and questioning something. The rotting corpse stood at the edge of the pit. Its gaze fell into the distance, incomparably deep, as if it could pierce through the boundaries of space and time. Little thing, no matter where you flee to, I will find you. The withered branches of earth demon thistles absorbed infernal energy to grow. They were incomparably hard, and the sharp thorns that covered the branches contained a potent poison. They could also release an invisible infernal heart that bewildered the mind. In addition, earth demon thistles were vegetation that grew in groups. Once they wove together, even the powerful monster beasts and evil beings of the Sea of Purgatory wouldn't be willing to enter. This thistle forest in front of them stretched out as far as the eye could see. It had grown for at least tens of thousands of years, or even longer. Occasionally, in the gaps between the thistles, one could see some pale white skeletons. These were the remains of powerful life forms that had mistakenly entered here many years ago. This was because the weaker ones had already been cleanly absorbed and fused with the black earth. At this time, in the skies above this thistle forest that could be called a forbidden zone, space suddenly shattered and a figure flew out. The black-robed, black-haired man was Chinyu. His sharp eyes swept around. He didn't find any dangers, but as he looked at the thistle forest that stretched out as far as the eye could see, he revealed a happy expression. The potent poison and terrifying infernal heart had no effect on him. Rather, they were a natural barrier. Thus, to others, this thistle forest could be called a dangerous place, but to Chinyu, it was actually the best place to rest. He flicked his sleeves and wiped away the thistles, completely disregarding the poisonous gas that was released when the branches were broken. Then he sat down and took out some pills. When that little girl attacked him just now, she had broken his recovery. Even now, his leg bones were aching and the damage to his body was still ongoing. He swallowed the pills into his stomach. As he felt a warm feeling rapidly spreading through his chest, Chinyu smiled. With his status as the demonic path saint's son, he naturally obtained the best supply of pills. After these demonic path pills were purified by the little blue lamp, their efficacy had become even more amazing. And at most a day, he would be able to restore himself to his peak condition. Without warning, Chinyu's eyes shot open. His heart raced and beads of sweat dripped down his forehead. In that moment, he felt as if he had been locked onto by a vicious beast in the darkness. He could even smell the stench of its sharp teeth. When he sensed again, everything had calmed down. But Yu knew that he wouldn't have such a feeling for no reason. It seemed to represent some sort of omen, rotten corpse. A thought jumped out in Yu's mind. Perhaps in the future, he would meet this person again. His face was cloudy and uncertain. After a long time, he took a deep breath and suppressed his tumbling thoughts. Yu was expressionless. His eyes were like a calm lake, icy cold. So what if they met again? Today he wasn't a match for this person and could only flee in distress. But who knew what would happen in the future? Perhaps on the day they met again, their identities as the hunter and the hunted might have swapped places. Thinking of this, Yu no longer felt any fear. He closed his eyes and calmed his mind. He began to catalyze and absorb the medicinal efficacy with all his might. Time quietly passed. In the blink of an eye, a day passed. Shwa. Yu's eyes flashed open, a sharp light flashing within them. He stood up and his bones began to crackle. A powerful strength surged through his flesh and blood. Adversity could truly stimulate one's potential. Although Yu hadn't cultivated yet, whether it was his cultivation or mortal body, both had risen to a certain degree. Although the Earth Slaughter Thistle's forest was safe, it wasn't a place to stay for long. After being chased by the rotten corpse, Yu's desire to become stronger had risen. As for the Sea of Purgatory's water demon, he had to obtain it. However, without the help of Wei Jia and the others, the difficulty of this matter had greatly increased. He needed to carefully plan and look for other opportunities. He looked down at the black armor he wore. Thinking for a moment, Yu's thoughts stirred and the armor vanished from sight. It was originally formed from the little saint robe, but now it had turned into simple black clothes. Of course, Yu didn't forget to change his appearance. The new demonic path, Saint's son. Without accident, any influence within the land of divinity and demons with some foundation would have already obtained information on his identity. His identity as a true demon guard was a good concealment when he was with Wei Jia and the others. But if he moved alone, it would be a bit more conspicuous. After finishing this, Yu stepped forwards and shot into the skies. After determining the direction, he soared deep into the Sea of Purgatory. After being chased by the rotten corpse, perhaps Yu's bad luck had been temporarily exhausted. For the next 2 days, it was a rare tranquility. It was like all of the terrifying life forms of the Sea of Purgatory had vanished without a trace. Although he didn't know the reason, Yu didn't waste this chance. He didn't rest at all. For 2 days, he rushed forwards at full speed, passing through a vast region. During this time, he encountered several waves of cultivators. Luckily, because of the cosmic sea crossbell, Yu discovered them early on and avoided them without revealing his tracks. The so-called depths of the Sea of Purgatory didn't have a clear division. Because the life forms within were terrifyingly strong, it was called the Forbidden Land. Yu carefully looked over the map and determined that he had arrived at the edge of the Forbidden Land. After a moment, he would be able to enter. However, that water demon was extremely tyrannical and lived in the depths of the Forbidden Land. He estimated that he would need at least 2 or 3 more days to reach it. Suddenly, his entire body felt cold and gloomy, as if he had entered a world of ice and snow. Yu came to a sudden stop. When he turned around, all he could see was a vast expanse of gray. He couldn't see the path he came from at all. His complexion sank, but he didn't panic. These 2 days of tranquility hadn't made him forget that he was in the extremely dangerous Sea of Purgatory. It seemed that he had used up all of his good luck. He bitterly smiled. After a moment of hesitation, Yu flicked his sleeves, and a half-buried stone howled out from the ground, crashing into the endless gray fog. In an instant, the stone submerged into the fog. Without any further movement, it vanished from sight. Yu frowned. As he was thinking, he heard the sound of breaking air. Several cultivators were rapidly flying towards him. "Fellow Taoists, do not touch the fog," the person in the lead cried out. Yu turned and looked at them. Shwa. The group of 4 landed on the ground. As they saw Yu was unharmed, they all revealed relaxed expressions. The cultivator in the lead was a middle-aged man with white sideburns. He didn't approach, instead standing several steps away. "Greetings, fellow Taoist. We're the same as you, cultivators that have been trapped here." Qin Yu swept his eyes over these people, not speaking for a moment. The person smiled. "I understand. It's normal for fellow Taoists to have some scruples. Let me explain to fellow Taoists first. The fog behind you is called the Yellow Springs." "Yellow Springs." Undying's voice sounded out, his tone especially dignified. After several breaths of time, he said, "These people aren't wrong. This is indeed the Yellow Springs." In the next moment, information about this fog appeared in Qin Yu's mind. The Yellow Springs fog was also known as the fog of disorientation. Any object that touched it, whether it was a living being or not, would be instantly sucked in. As for where these objects went, no one knew. This was because up until now, no living being that was sucked into the fog had ever returned alive. It was because of this that this fog was named the Yellow Springs. Entering it was the same as stepping into the Yellow Springs. All life would be extinguished. Sensing Qin Yu's dignified expression, the middle-aged cultivator said, "It seems fellow Taoist is experienced and knowledgeable enough to know just how fierce the Yellow Springs fog is. Then, there is no need for me to explain any further." His expression was solemn. "We arrived here earlier than fellow Taoist and have already investigated how this place was formed. I wonder if fellow Taoist would be willing to return to the camp with us so that we could discuss how to escape." Qin Yu couldn't refuse this proposal. He nodded. "If so, then I'll have to trouble you all." The several people revealed smiles. "Fellow Taoist will soon understand. Only by joining forces will we have a chance of survival. Helping you is the same as helping ourselves, so there's no need to have scruples." As they spoke, the several people led the way. Qin Yu kept a distance behind them. The middle-aged cultivator and the others weren't dissatisfied with Qin Yu's cautiousness. If they were in his shoes, they would have done the same. The journey was silent. Luckily, the camp wasn't too far away and they soon arrived. Although it was called a camp, it was actually just a series of simple stone houses. Seeing the several people return, everyone in the camp came out to welcome them. Sweeping his eyes over them, there were around a dozen people, none of them weak. Qin Yu wasn't surprised by this. Those that had the courage to smoothly arrive at the edge of the forbidden land definitely weren't ordinary people. But what he didn't expect was that the leader of this clearly hastily built group was actually a beautiful young woman. No, simply beautiful wasn't enough to describe her. It would be more accurate to say that she was elegant and graceful. Every movement she made was clear. It was clear that her status wasn't ordinary. She was the last to come out. She seemed to be handling something. Her cheeks were pale, and her smile was sincere and kind. Everyone greeted her, their indifferent expressions fading a bit. It seemed that she was quite popular. "My name is Sangju. I will temporarily lead everyone to break through our current predicament. I welcome you to join us." These words revealed her identity. Beneath everyone's eyes, Qin Yu's heart stirred. Sangju's expression was friendly, and her voice was calm and natural. But he couldn't help but have some other thoughts. This woman seemed to place great importance on being the leader. Why was that? People were like this. Once they had a thought, they would carefully examine it. Looking at the warm smile on Sangju's face, Qin Yu became a bit more cautious. "Fellow Taoist Sangju, how do you do? My name is Xuanfeng." It was clearly a fake name. Sangju was startled. Her eyes flashed, and she smiled. "Fellow Taoist Xuanfeng, how do you do? Because there are constantly fellow Taoists that accidentally stumble into this place. I specially made a jade slip with detailed explanations. If you don't understand anything, just tell me." After carefully sensing the jade slip and determining that there was nothing wrong with it, Qin Yu thanked her and probed it with his divine sense. A moment later, he opened his eyes, his complexion dignified. His luck had really run out. After conversing with Undying for several moments and determining that there wasn't any lie in the jade slip, Qin Yu took a deep breath and said, "I'll leave everything to fellow Taoist Sangju." Chapter 574. The simple and crude campsite and the dusky sky were filled with a sense of desolation. Chinyu stood in front of the house, looking at the corpse covered in white cloth as well as Sang Zhu's sorrowful expression. He couldn't help but doubt his own judgment. Was he thinking too much? Secretly shaking his head, he suppressed his tumbling emotions. Regardless of whether this woman was as he thought, he shouldn't be careless. Sang Zhu looked up, revealing her slightly red eyes. Everyone, fellow Taoist Zhang Xian's wounds are too heavy to be treated. But he died to help everyone escape. I will bring his corpse out of the sea of purgatory and return it to his family. These are fellow Taoist Zhang's belongings. In accordance with his final wishes, I will hand them over to the person he designated. Now, please check the records. Sang Zhu swears that she will absolutely complete Zhang Xian's task. Everyone was instantly moved. After entering the sea of purgatory, no matter who it was, there was no guarantee they could escape unscathed. In other words, since everyone had come here, they were prepared to be buried here. He could not help but think, what if the person who died today was me? Will someone help me collect my corpse and return my belongings? Regardless of whether or not everyone thought that Sang Zhu's actions were to win over the hearts of the people, all of their faces were moved. All right, I'll be the witness. This is a dangerous place. Who knows what the road ahead will be like? If I am unlucky and meet with misfortune, I will leave it to you all. I hope that in the future, I will be able to personally witness Her Highness Sang Zhu delivering her belongings. He addressed Sang Zhu as Your Highness because Sang Zhu was a princess of the Qi Kingdom. Because of this, when she spoke up in front of everyone, people would believe her. Although the princess of the Qi Kingdom wasn't qualified to inherit the throne, her status was still incomparably noble. If he went back on his word, the entire Qi Empire's sovereign clan would be humiliated. Naturally, his credibility would be extremely high. Sang Zhu solemnly said, I will not disappoint you all. Her eyes swept around. I have already calculated that the strength of the array formation will weaken tomorrow. The key to life and death lies in this gamble. Everyone's eyes lit up. They were slightly uneasy, but more than that, they were yearning. No one is willing to welcome the arrival of death, but sometimes the dawn you see, can it really illuminate yourself? That might not be the case. At almost the same time, the rotten corpse that was following its instincts and walking through the sea of purgatory suddenly stopped, its eyes shining as it stared at the ground. He seemed to penetrate the barrier of the earth. His gaze fell into the depths of the earth. His breathing became rapid, and his body began to tremble. This aura, there was no mistaking it. It was it. The decayed corpse's thoughts were in chaos. He didn't know what he was thinking, but he knew that it was what he longed to obtain. In fact, the reason why he had fallen to such a state was because of it. The zombie let out a low roar, and black flames ignited around its body. It was so terrifying that it could even burn the ground. His figure sank into the ground bit by bit and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The next day, in the camp, Sang Zhu explained everything in detail, including the key points of breaking the array. She asked carefully to make sure everyone understood, then said, Let's go. The Yellow Springs fog covered a large area. Perhaps it was the influence of the invisible, baleful aura that caused the life inside to be extinguished. Along the way, Chinyu didn't see any vegetation or life. There was only a deathly silence. However, the further he went, the more pressure he felt in his heart. Even the deathly stillness in the surroundings had gained some sinister aura. This feeling was like a collapsing mountain. Although it wasn't strong, it was still extremely terrifying. Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows. He glanced at Sang Zhu, who was leading the way. His eyes flashed, and he slowed down several steps, falling behind the several people in the group. A moment later, a mountain valley appeared in front of them. To their surprise, this mountain valley actually had 4 entrances, and they all looked exactly the same. Sang Zhu stopped. The restless people behind her all revealed happy expressions. There were only 4 paths. She let out a deep breath and said, It looks like my calculations were correct. Time is pressing. Let's split up and proceed according to the plan. The group divided into four. Qinyu was in the third position on the left. Sangju swept her eyes around and then headed straight for the group. I'll go with you. The several people beside her all revealed happy expressions. Although they had some confidence they could break through the array formation and leave the Yellow Springs fog today, no one could be sure whether or not they would succeed. But whether it would succeed or not, no one dared to be sure. Walking together with Sangju, there was no doubt that it would be safer. And this point had already been confirmed during the last test. Qinyu maintained his composure. A bit of caution rose in his heart. Even if Sangju's performance was normal, he still chose to believe in his own intuition. Although the other cultivators were unwilling, they knew they couldn't force it. They all nodded and said goodbye to each other before quickly walking into the channel. Unexpectedly, this channel wasn't long. After a dozen or so steps, they arrived at the depths of the mountain valley. Unlike the deathly stillness outside, the mountain valley in front of them was actually filled with life. Green grass and flowers bloomed everywhere. Qinyu was startled. At this time, Undying shouted out in his mind, "Wake up!" His eyes blurred. When they cleared up once more, there was no longer any life in front of him. All he could see was black gas. It tumbled about like a pure black fog, without any aura leaking out. But as Qinyu looked at it, his pupils instinctively shrank. This feeling was as if he had encountered a natural predator. Or to be more precise, it was something extremely terrifying. He didn't know what this black gas was, but he knew that if he fell into it without any precautions, his fate would be miserable. Besides him, Sangju and the others all had dazed expressions. They looked ahead in a daze as they walked forward step by step. Hide well. Don't worry about them. Undying's voice continued to ring out. Qinyu wasn't a good person. Since Undying reminded him, there had to be a reason. He maintained the same rhythm as everyone else. Because he was at the back, he could see everyone's movements. They approached the black fog. As Sangju stood at the front, she was about to step into the black fog, but there still wasn't any abnormality. After several steps, Sangju was the first to enter the black fog, followed by several others. As Qinyu hesitated, Undying continued to say, "Master, there's no need to worry. Just follow." Although Undying could be trusted, when Qinyu stepped in the black fog, he still felt a chill crawl up his back. But something terrifying didn't happen. An invisible strength separated him from the black fog outside. Qinyu's eyebrows shot up, surprise on his face. This was because this strength was the power of an array formation. Since when did Undying possess such a high-level ability to form an array formation from the void? Or had he been hiding it all this time? As if guessing Qinyu's confusion, Undying said, "This is not my strength, but the strength of the endless sea's great array formation spirit." Qinyu's eyes widened. He immediately thought back to when he rushed into the road of sea burial and the terrifying ambush he encountered at the end. Wasn't it said that the endless sea's array formation spirit had been destroyed? Undying said, "His consciousness has already been annihilated, leaving behind only pure strength. This matter is complex. If Master is interested, I will tell you in the future." Qinyu nodded. He thought to himself, "What do we do now?" Undying smiled. "If there isn't an accident, all you need to do is wait. Someone will naturally send you away." The taunting tone in his words was undisguised. Mountain Valley, outside the black fog. Sangju's figure appeared out of thin air. She stared at the tumbling black fog, her usually gentle eyes now filled with callousness. It was just that there was now a bit of hesitation in her eyes. That cautious Xuanfeng had been dealt with so easily, she thought there would be some trouble. Chapter 575. Another entrance to the mountain valley. The passage was unexpectedly long. After walking for a long time, several people still couldn't see the end. Luckily, they remembered Sangju's arrangements and were cautious, so no accidents occurred. "Brother Su, is there something wrong?" a person in the group asked. The others all revealed concerned expressions. They didn't completely trust Sang Zhu, but they were forced by the situation. The cultivator, surnamed Su, had studied a great deal of array formations. He thought for a moment and said, "I won't hide it from you all. This great array formed from the Yellow Springs fog contains the cycle of yin and yang in the world. I can only see a few parts of it, but from what I can see, there shouldn't be any problems." Everyone's expressions relaxed. In truth, they already knew this, but hearing the cultivator, surnamed Su, say it again gave them some psychological comfort. At this time, there was a loud explosion above their heads, like a thunderclap in broad daylight. The scene in front of them suddenly distorted. The cultivator, surnamed Su, shouted out, "This is bad. This passage is about to close. We must retreat." Everyone turned around and fled for their lives, but it was already too late. The shattered space swallowed them in one gulp. In the third passage, the ground dissolved, turning into tumbling crimson liquid. Faint strands rose up. Although they seemed small and weak, they were actually terrifyingly tenacious. They were like some sort of well-developed root system. No matter how the cultivators desperately resisted, they still stubbornly and tenaciously crawled over their bodies. Then it forcefully contracted, pulling these cultivators into the crimson liquid. With a burst of bubbles, they completely vanished from sight. The fourth passage. A group of people were trapped in the fog, their faces filled with fear. Luckily, as long as they didn't move, the black fog would remain still. Although there wasn't any immediate danger, the fear of the unknown still left them tormented. Not too far away from them, Sang Zhu's face appeared in the black fog. Her icy cold eyes fell on the group of people before fading away. From beginning to end, these people didn't discover Sang Zhu's arrival, nor did they know that they had just brushed shoulders with death. Of course, the reason she let them go wasn't because she was soft-hearted. Sang Zhu wasn't certain that the sacrifices she prepared would be able to achieve her goal without fail. Leaving them behind was just bait. If the sacrifices weren't enough, she could use these people to attract more cultivators. Deep within the mountain valley, shrouded in endless black fog, there was a blood-red cocoon that constantly beat like a heart. Countless blood threads drilled out of its surface, intertwining with each other to form tentacles. At the end of each tentacle was a translucent bubble, within which was a cultivator. If one were to sense carefully, they would discover that the life auras of the cultivators in the bubbles were slowly weakening. That was because all of their life force was being continuously plundered and sent into the blood-colored cocoon. Suddenly, the black fog roiled and Sang Zhu stepped out. Her eyes indifferently swept over the scene in front of her, and she lightly stepped forward. In the next moment, a vortex appeared on the ground, from which emerged the unconscious cultivators from the three tunnels. The blood-colored cocoon's pulsation rate suddenly increased, as though it was extremely excited. In the next moment, even more blood vessels emerged, intertwining with each other as they extended outwards, dragging the cultivators away. Those strands of blood drilled into their scalps. The unconscious cultivators' bodies twitched and then fell silent. Then, the transparent bubble slowly opened and completely enveloped them. Sang Zhu's complexion slightly changed, and her eyes turned bone-chilling cold. Because they were missing one person. Sun Feng. She took a deep breath and suppressed her tumbling emotions. She closed her eyes, and the quiet black fog around her suddenly began to tumble. Rumble. The momentum was vast and mighty, like a roaring sea. Unfortunately, all of this was in vain. Within the tumbling black fog that resembled boiling water, Qin Yu was like a shadow, completely unaffected. Looking up, he could clearly see Sang Zhu's increasingly gloomy complexion. Undying, she's already suspicious. Even if she had a plan, hiding in the dark was the best. Once she was discovered, the effects would be greatly reduced. Undying lightly said, "Master, there is no need to worry. With things having come to this point, she has no other choice. You will understand once you continue watching." Shua. Sang Zhu opened her eyes, anger burning in her heart. Because this matter concerned her future, She had been careful enough, but she never imagined that at this critical moment, she would make such a big mistake. A living person had actually disappeared within her sleeves. Sang Zhu's pale fingers clenched into fists. Her eyes drooped as her thoughts raced. After a long time, she let out a long breath, her eyes cold and sharp. No one could escape here. Even if she couldn't find them now, once she resurrected the evil spirit and refined it into her body, she would be able to see everything. As for whether or not Xuanfeng would cause trouble, Sang Zhu's eyes were icy cold. If he jumped out, that would be for the best. Since she had decided to do such a dangerous thing, she had made full preparations. Even if it was a calamity immortal realm existence, she wouldn't fear them. Humph! With a sneer, Sang Zhu said in a soft voice, "You little rat running for your life, just wait for me. I will definitely catch you." She lifted a hand and pointed a finger. The blood-red cocoon trembled. In the next moment, it contracted and expanded, its beating rate rising by several times. Bang, bang, in the deathly silence. This sound was particularly clear, as if it came from a real heart. The blood tendrils connected to the air bubble suddenly rose up, pulling the cultivators wrapped in the air bubble into the air. These unconscious cultivators violently trembled within the air bubble. Their complexions rapidly paled, and their life auras wildly flowed out like a broken dam. Sang Zhu's eyes burned with a burning heat. She stared at the scene in front of her, her chest heaving up and down. From the day she was born, she had been unwilling to accept her fate. Why couldn't she inherit the throne, even though they both had the imperial bloodline? Was it because she was a woman? How unfair was this? She wanted to resist. Ever since she was a child, she wanted to be strong and do her best in everything she did. But no one cared about her. Even if they praised her, it was just a light and fleeting word that was quickly forgotten. Sang Zhu was angry. She resented. She struggled. But she didn't have the qualifications to resist. She could only gradually sink into depression. But just as she was about to accept her fate, the heavens had given her an unexpected chance. As long as she could accomplish this, she would truly have the strength to cause the entire imperial bloodline to turn their heads. This was Sang Zhu's final chance. Whether it was for herself or for the woman she intimately called mother when she was a child, the woman who had been beaten to death. She had to succeed, even if she had to pay a heavy price, even if she had to stain her hands with blood. Sang Zhu stood up straight. Her breathing gradually steadied. She didn't regret it, nor did she feel any guilt. In this world, the weak were prey to the strong. These people had died under her hands, so this was their fate. No one could stop her. If there was, she would just kill them. Chapter 576/P. Undying was silent for a moment. He asked, "Does Master know what this blood cocoon is?" The Yellow Springs fog is not naturally formed by the heavens and earth, but is caused by the dissipation of a vicious being's aura. This vicious being is called a hell evil spirit. Since ancient times, there have been rumors that there is a mysterious domain between the heavens and earth where the souls of living beings return to after they die. This is the Yellow Springs of Hell. The so-called evil spirit is only a title. Master, you can view it as a special life form born from hell. It has the ability to control 100 ghosts and command a ghost army. The Yellow Springs of Hell truly exist. Master, although I don't know why this blood cocoon would appear here, if I'm not wrong, then it is the evil spirit embryo. Undying paused, giving him time to consider. In my plan, Master has a high chance of seizing this evil spirit embryo today. Once you can refine and tame it, you will obtain the power to control 100 ghosts. Master can only resist ordinary tribulation immortals right now, but if you can obtain the help of 100 ghosts, your strength will multiply. Qin Yu's heart shook. He never imagined that this blood cocoon would have such an origin. Since Undying spoke, it wasn't baseless. He must be confident in his plan. With his current cultivation, every step forward had become extraordinarily difficult. Multiply his strength, the opportunity was right in front of him. The temptation was truly astonishing. Moreover, he didn't need to do much. He only needed to quietly watch from the sidelines. If he said his heart wasn't moved, he would be deceiving himself. But his eyes flashed, and he slowly shook his head, his expression firm. Undying said, "This is a heaven-sent opportunity. Master needs to carefully consider it. Is it worth it?" With the decision made, his heart calmed down. Yu lightly said, "In this world, there are always many things one cannot do. But one should still hold on to the most basic bottom line. If he were to stand idly by today, he would feel guilty for the rest of his life. Perhaps it really wasn't worth it, but it was precisely because of this that they could be called people. Otherwise, how would they be any different from wild beasts?" Undying sighed. "I hope that Master won't regret this in the future." His tone was a bit helpless, but there was also a bit of gratification hidden within. At this time, within his soul space, the cosmic sea crossbell and the hanging purple moon, as well as the blue sun phantom in his Dantian sea, all of their energies seemed to slow down. It wasn't just Undying alone who was touched by this. Perhaps from this day onwards, the several guests within his body had established true trust with Yu. Between the gains and losses, it was hard to say for some time. It was just that Yu didn't know this yet. Undying's voice returned to tranquility. "If Master wishes to save her, then the plan must change. I must make some preparations. That woman saying Zhu should be prepared, so Master must be a bit more cautious." Yu nodded. After entering the sea of purgatory, he had been a bit distressed. This wasn't because he was weak, but because the sea of purgatory was far too terrifying. In terms of cultivation, someone that could fight with an early calamity immortal was absolutely at the peak of all the cultivators that entered the sea of purgatory. What's more, he had many trump cards in his hands, so he wasn't afraid of saying Zhu. This wasn't arrogance, but rather the self-confidence he had gained after going through many trials and tribulations. Feng Yunyun felt as if she had fallen into a swamp. She was surrounded by pitch-black mud, and a terrifying pressure came from all directions. His chest felt heavy, and the bones in his body creaked. It felt as if his entire body was about to be crushed. Vaguely, she knew that she was not in the right state. She struggled to wake up, but her eyelids felt as if they weighed 1,000 pounds. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't open them. Her body grew colder and colder. The consciousness that she was barely able to gather began to show signs of dissipating. She didn't know what was happening to her, but she instinctively felt fear. It was as if as long as she fell asleep, she would never wake up again. "I can't sleep. Wake up. Hurry and wake up." She screamed in her heart, but it was useless. Her consciousness became increasingly muddled. Suddenly, a loud sound entered her ears. It was like thunder in the skies, rumbling straight into the deepest depths of her heart. The oppressive pressure around her suddenly dissipated. She subconsciously gasped for breath, and it was only then that Feng Yunyun discovered that she had woken up. Her body was sore and weak. Her joints ached, and she couldn't summon the least bit of strength. A layer of sticky film stuck to her body. Feng Yunyun moved her body and discovered that there was a strange object above her head. She reached out with difficulty and grabbed it. As she pulled, she felt an intense pain. This strange object had drilled into her body, and now it was wriggling as if it wanted to drill further into her body. She was horrified. She didn't care about the heart-wrenching pain. Feng Yunyun didn't know where she found the strength to pull that strange object down. As it fell in front of her eyes, she saw that it was a mass of blood vessels that wriggled in her hand, quickly drying up. What was going on, in her memories, she had clearly been with Su Wanze just now. Before she could think further, a shrill scream entered her ears. It was like an arrow piercing through her mind. Feng Yunyun's mind buzzed, and she fainted. The black fog rapidly retreated. The Yellow Springs fog that blocked off the surrounding world began to converge like a tide, submerging into the blood cocoon. It howled far away, its speed faster than lightning. In the blink of an eye, it vanished from sight without giving anyone time to react. As he felt the resentment that came from that scream just now, he stiffened. In his heart, Undying was both shocked and angry. That evil spirit woke up long ago. While he was ashamed, he also rejoiced. Luckily, Chinyu had decided to save her. If he had followed his plan and waited for this evil spirit to finish growing, the consequences would have been inconceivable. Sangju looked in the direction that the blood cocoon vanished, her mind blanking out for a brief moment. She had worked hard for all these years, paid a great price for this day, even sacrificed her innocence and blocked off all paths of retreat. But in the end, this was the result. She had used a wicker basket to draw water for nothing. At this moment, she truly understood the bitterness in those words. Then, from the depths of her heart, all of the anger, resentment, and despair that surged out turned icy cold. Sangju looked up. She stubbornly stared at Chinyu, who appeared after the black fog dissipated. Her voice seemed to come from the 9 nether realms. "I will draw out your soul and refine it." In her opinion, it was Chinyu's sudden attack that had awakened the evil spirit that hadn't fully grown yet, causing all of her efforts to fail. She lifted a hand. A bell appeared in Sangju's hand. It was the color of black jade, and its surface was slightly translucent. With a shake of her wrist, the bell rang out. The rapid syllables stirred up some kind of aura between the heavens and earth. Black arrows condensed in the air. Their number was like a torrential rain that flooded every inch of space. Whoosh, whoosh. As the arrows fell, they whistled through the air. Chinyu lifted a hand and thrust forward. Layers of deep blue water light erupted, forming a vast and mighty momentum that turned into the phantom of a vast sea. Countless black arrows shot into the water light. Then, like frost beneath the blazing sun, they melted away. Although there were countless arrows and they caused violent vibrations in the sea phantom, they weren't able to break through it. Chinyu held a hand in front of him, blocking the arrows that filled the skies. At this moment, the formidable power of the Path of Water was fully revealed. Although it hadn't reached large success, in terms of defensive power, it wasn't any weaker than that of an ordinary Calamity Immortal. Sangju clenched her teeth, her eyes becoming increasingly cold. No wonder he had dared to ruin her plans. He really did have some methods. At this time, she couldn't help but feel regret. She had already realized that Xu Wenfeng wasn't someone easy to deal with. If she had been more cautious, she might have been able to avoid today's outcome. But the more she regretted, the angrier she became. Sangju opened her mouth and spat out a bead. This bead was pitch black, and as soon as it appeared, the surrounding temperature began to rapidly fall. There was naturally a reason why she knew about the evil spirit. Her innate body was the greatest reason she had the confidence to refine the evil spirit. Now that the evil spirit had fled, all of her preparations had failed. The only thing she wanted to do now was to kill the Chinyu, who ruined her plans. She didn't hesitate to pay any price. This bead seemed ordinary and only possessed the ice attribute. But Sangju had spent a great deal of time and effort to condense it from the cold energy of the world. Hesitation flashed in her eyes before turning into determination. Sangju lifted a hand, and the bead loudly shattered. A black light shot out. It was like an illusory shadow, completely unhindered. In the blink of an eye, it pierced through the deep blue water light and drilled into Chinyu's body from between his eyebrows. But the cruel and fierce expression on her face only lasted for a breath of time before it turned to panic and fear. Because there wasn't anything wrong with Chinyu, it was like the black light that drilled into his forehead was really just a shadow. Or perhaps he himself was a black hole that could erase any heretic that invaded his body. But no matter what the true reason was, it represented an extremely terrifying strength. Sangju paled, and a look of panic appeared in her vicious eyes. She turned and left. Using some unknown method, her figure suddenly split into 3, each with a similar aura, as they rapidly fled in different directions. The rain of black arrows dissipated. Chinyu drew back his hand, and the water light faded away. As he looked at Sang Zhu's 3 fleeing figures, his eyes were ice cold. This woman had an extraordinary status, and her personality was ruthless and cruel. Since the two of them had an irreconcilable enmity, he couldn't let her go. Although the 3 figures had similar auras, their souls wouldn't lie. Through the cosmic sea crossbell, Qin Yu could directly lock onto her true body. He lifted his right hand and bent his index finger like he was pulling a bowstring. Silver white light rapidly gathered, releasing a terrifying aura. It was like 1,000 mountains and 10,000 rivers could be cut apart. Qin Yu let go. The silver white light howled forwards at an unimaginable speed. Sang Zhu could feel a terrifying aura rapidly approaching from behind her. She wanted to dodge, but her heart turned cold. This was because she discovered that this strike had locked onto her aura. She couldn't avoid it. Although she was strong, the disparity between her and Qin Yu's strength was too great. The path of metal that was filled with killing intent was more than enough to kill her. Moreover, this path of metal was stimulated by a portion of the great Tao. It directly touched upon the rules of the world, so its might was even more terrifying. Ah! Sang Zhu screamed. She crazily stimulated her protective strength, and layers of light covered her. But beneath the path of metal, all of this was like a bubble bursting apart with a single touch. She couldn't block it at all. Just as Sang Zhu was about to die here, the air suddenly condensed and a layer of frost appeared on the surface of the silver white light. Because the color was similar, it wasn't too conspicuous at first. Then an icy cold aura erupted, sealing the entire silver white light in ice. Kacha! The layer of ice shattered. The killing strike of the path of metal dispersed with it. Escaping from death, Sang Zhu paled. She only stared blankly at the figure that appeared in front of her. A thin veil covered her appearance, but even so, one could still taste a certain unrivaled elegance from her body. She was stunned. At this moment, jealousy instinctively rose in Sang Zhu's heart. But she immediately woke up and lowered her head to hide her emotions. Who was this woman? She was even more dignified than the dignified princess of an empire. Qin Yu had already recognized that the one who had intervened was the veiled female cultivator he had worked with in the city ruins. As he thought about how, just as he felt guilty, she had cleanly left, Qin Yu's complexion darkened. Of course, he would never admit that his current expression was to cover up his embarrassment. Thinking about it, he really didn't know what he was doing back then. Shen Yuanin looked at the man in front of her and frowned. Her icy but pleasant voice echoed out, "It's you." Qin Yu's killing intent was boiling, and his aura erupted. He naturally couldn't hide it any longer. "We meet again." Looking around from the corner of his eyes, he could see that the female cultivators that followed behind her had all disappeared. It seemed that this woman had encountered some trouble these past days. He carefully sensed her. Although it was blurry beneath her strong appearance, there seemed to be a bit of weakness hidden within. Hearing Qin Yu's calm voice, Shen Yuanin's calm heart began to ripple. She quietly revolved her cultivation method, loathing rising in her heart. I must protect this woman. Her voice became even colder, as if a single disagreement would erupt. Qin Yu frowned. Do you know what she did? Shen Yuanin coldly said, I don't know and I don't want to know. The sublime lost emotion code left behind awe towards death. The only emotion that could be called recognition of the immortal sect. As the master of Nine Heaven Mirror Moon Palace, she couldn't allow a direct disciple of the immortal sect to die in front of her. When Sang Zhu was on the verge of death, she had hastily activated her defenses. One of them was the power of the immortal token. Otherwise, with Shen Yuanin's current condition, why would she save her? As Qin Yu heard this, his intentions of explaining disappeared. He looked deeply at her and said, As you wish. He turned and left. He wasn't blinded by lust, but this veiled female cultivator was unfathomably deep in his eyes. Her strength was tyrannical. If he insisted on killing Sang Zhu and came into conflict with her, he feared both sides would be wounded. carrying the unconscious Feng Yunyun. Qin Yu shot into the skies and soon vanished from sight. Looking at the two people leave, ripples appeared in Shun Yuanin's heart once more. Why was this person always able to disturb her mind? Just as these questions rose in her mind, they were immediately suppressed. Sublime lost emotion code. She didn't want to waste time on trivial matters. That's right, in Shun Yuanin's eyes, the current Qin Yu was someone she could ignore. She turned and coldly said, "Who are you? Why do you have an immortal token?" Sang Zhu had already regained her composure. She respectfully bowed and said, "Reporting to Fairy Maiden, I am a princess of the Qi Empire's imperial family. Although I haven't truly entered the immortal sect, I have been sheltered by the immortal sect since I was a child. When I was a year old, I was bestowed with an immortal token." As she spoke, she presented the token with both hands. Shen Yuanin swept her eyes over it. It was indeed an immortal sect immortal token. She nodded and said, "The Sea of Purgatory is a dangerous place. You should immediately withdraw, lest you die here." She turned to leave. "Fairy Maiden, please wait a moment," Sang Zhu hurriedly said. Shen Yuanin stopped, her eyes cold and indifferent. As Sang Zhu saw that she wasn't easily moved, she quickly changed tactics. She no longer dared to use weakness to gain sympathy. She respectfully said, "Fairy Maiden's great graciousness in saving my life is something that Sang Zhu will never forget. I wonder if there is anything I can do for Fairy Maiden?" She glanced around and was overjoyed to see that Shun Yuanin didn't refuse. The Qi Empire's imperial family has always respected the immortal sect. If Emperor Father and the elders of the family were to learn that Sang Zhu has received Fairy Maiden's kindness without repaying it, they would surely punish me. I ask Fairy Maiden to give me a chance to repay this debt." As she spoke, she respectfully knelt down. Shen Yuanin said, "If you are willing, then follow me for the time being and protect me while I cultivate." Qin Yu's senses weren't wrong. She had indeed been injured. But the most important reason was the backlash of her cultivation method. Shen Yuanin shouldn't have activated the sublime lost emotion code in the near future in order to avoid triggering hidden dangers. It could be seen that Qin Yu's heart lake had fluctuated twice, and he had no choice but to suppress it with his cultivation method. Thinking about it carefully, Qin Yu had to bear a considerable part of the responsibility for her current condition. Sang Zhu was overjoyed. "I will follow Fairy Maiden's instructions." She bowed and lowered her head, her voice respectful. The hellish evil spirit fled, and the Yellow Springs fog scattered. Qin Yu easily left. He flew for 2 hours before stopping. His divine sense erupted and swept out. After determining that he was temporarily safe, he landed and placed Feng Yunyun on the ground. In the infinite realm, Qin Yu had been framed by the immortal sect cultivators, and only this woman had testified against him. If it weren't for this, Qin Yu wouldn't have done anything, and Feng Yunyun would have already died. Of course, reality proved that sticking to one's bottom line was always rewarded with good fortune. Qin Yu saving her was the same as indirectly saving himself. Otherwise, that hellish, evil spirit that was pretending to be sleeping wouldn't be easy to deal with. As he hurried along, he had already examined her. Now, he placed a hand between her eyebrows and carefully sensed her for several breaths of time. Qin Yu revealed a relaxed expression. Although she was a bit weak, her condition was stable. She would recover after some time. However, this was the Sea of Purgatory. There was no such thing as an absolutely safe environment. With Feng Yunyun's current condition, she would soon die without protection. But Qin Yu wanted to hunt down the water demon, so it was impossible for him to bring her with him. This was a problem. He shook his head. He took out several recovery pills and fed them to Feng Yunyun. Then, he closed his eyes and began to meditate. He would wait until she woke up before discussing this matter. 2 cultivators flew at a low altitude. One of them suddenly stopped and turned to look at the ground, a look of surprise on his face. At this time, the other person also sensed something. He turned and their eyes collided. "This fluctuation, there's something wrong." The second person licked his lips. "That's right. It gives me the feeling that a treasure is about to appear." The air suddenly fell silent. The two people revealed a blazing heat in their eyes. The sea of purgatory was indeed dangerous, but there were also many good fortunes within. The two of them had already obtained some harvests. "Come, let's go take a look." The two people landed. A canyon appeared in front of them. As they approached, the fluctuations became increasingly strong. Originally, they only had suspicions, but now they were almost certain that there was a treasure here. Although the two were pleasantly surprised, they didn't lose their vigilance. They used various methods to investigate the canyon and determined that there weren't any dangers. Without further words, the two cultivators jumped down. Soon, there were two excited cries from within the canyon, as if they had obtained a great harvest. But for some unknown reason, their cries were soon filled with panic. At first, there were some sounds of movement, but then everything fell silent. The canyon on the ground began to slowly close up. A moment later, everything was flat, without any trace of its previous appearance. After another period of time, dirt and sand rose up from the ground, condensing into a large bald man. He stretched out his waist, and crackling sounds came from his joints. "Who?" "I woke up, and there's dessert. What a comfortable life." He revealed a simple and honest smile. He sniffed his nose and couldn't help but frown. "There's a stench. That damned corpse actually hasn't rotted away yet. How disappointing. But since even he has woken up, there should be some movement. Haha, I'm really looking forward to it." The large bald man smiled and stepped forwards. His figure suddenly dissipated, and in the next moment he appeared far away. With several more steps, he vanished from sight. At this time, the young miss in the assistant governor's residence had a panic-stricken expression. As she looked at the insects crawling towards her from all directions, her eyes turned white from fear. Although she was a daughter that her father didn't care about, she was still the dignified daughter of the Chu Empire's third assistant governor. Who would dare to harm her? She couldn't think of an answer because at this time, the young miss had already fainted. Before her consciousness fell into darkness, her last thought was this a dream? But in truth, this really wasn't a dream. Amidst the rustling sounds, extremely ugly bugs with legs under her abdomen crawled all over her body. With the sound of chewing to one's heart's content, her body thinned until all that was left over was a skeleton. With empty eye sockets, she powerlessly looked up at the dim skies. The only thing that comforted her was that all of this happened while she was unconscious, so she didn't feel too much pain. After the insects swallowed the flesh and blood, they all began to twitch. They rolled around on the ground, no longer having the comfortable appearance they had when they were eating. Bang, bang. The insects began to explode, one after another. They were so dense that they looked like firecrackers being lit. In the blink of an eye, the air was flooded with blood. What was even more strange was that this blood fog didn't disperse. Rather, it tumbled in the air as if it were brewing something. Finally, a blood-red arm stretched out from the blood fog. There was no skin on its surface, so it was dripping with blood. It slowly pressed down between the eyebrows of the skeleton. Strange lines appeared, rapidly extending along the skeleton. When the lines covered every inch of the skeleton, the blood-red arm trembled and collapsed, as if it had exhausted all of its strength. The blood fog scattered with it. All that remained on the ground was a petite skeleton covered with lines, whose two black flames suddenly ignited in its empty eye sockets. The skeleton stood up from the ground, its head turning as if it were looking around. In the next moment, it lifted a foot and stomped down. As this foot fell, the ground violently shook. There was a deep rumbling sound that came from deep underground. It was like some vicious beast that had been slumbering deep underground had awakened at this moment. Cracks appeared. Then, the earth collapsed, and a giant stone tablet broke through the earth. The stone tablet was 1,000 feet high, and a boundless aura wrapped around it. With a single glance, one could tell that it was an ancient object that had existed since ancient times. The words carved on the front were different from what they were now. It was unknown what they meant. On the back was a giant beast that was shaped like a snake. Its mouth seemed to swallow the sun and moon as it roared towards the heavens. If someone stood in the skies and looked down at the sea of purgatory, they would discover that at this moment there were 12 stone tablets that drilled out from the ground. The words were the same, but the back of each stone tablet was carved with a different giant beast. When the 12 stone tablets appeared, a heart-pounding aura suddenly descended, covering the entire sea of purgatory. As Chinyu closed his eyes, he suddenly awoke. A sharp light burst out from his eyes. That aura, just now, although he didn't know what had happened, it was like an invisible mountain had fallen on his heart. Even breathing became difficult. At the peak of the snake-like stone tablet, the skeleton held its hands behind its back. Black flames surged in its eye sockets, as if it were waiting for something. But in the end, what it expected didn't happen. The skeleton was silent for a long time. Then, it opened its mouth and laughed. So it wasn't the only one who had placed a stone today. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.